Chapter 110. Invisible Technique of Universe. Wuji Void Technique. Hongjuan did not care too much about the dissipation of Pangu's primordial spirit. After all, although Pangu's primordial spirit was of great benefit to his cultivation, it would dissipate one day. With Hongjuan's Tao seeking heart, he would not be bothered by the dissipation of something that was bound to dissipate. Relatively speaking, Hongjun was inexplicably surprised and excited to be able to unexpectedly obtain this art of creation and earth. This art of creation is the magical power that you yearn for the most in your heart. It contains infinite mysteries, but it is difficult to cultivate, and it also has a very high requirement for the realm of cultivation. According to my estimation, according to your current cultivation, even if you exhaust your mind, I'm afraid that you will only be able to create an imperfect world with a circumference of 10,000 feet. Luo Fan once again comprehended this technique and said to Hongjun, I know that my cultivation is far from enough to create a world. I'm already satisfied to be able to create such an imperfect world with a circumference of 10,000 feet. Hongjun did not care that he could not fully display the mysteries of this art, and the excitement on his face did not decrease at all. Hearing Hongjuan's words, Luo Fan nodded slightly. Being able to have a clear understanding of his own cultivation realm, Hongjuan's Tao heart had become more and more stable. That's good too. You can cultivate this art in your spare time. Maybe you can comprehend the great Tao of creation from it, which will be very beneficial to your cultivation. Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed. The jade archive dispersed with a bang, turning back into chaotic primordial chi and dissipated in the blink of an eye. It had already integrated into the surrounding endless chaotic primordial chi. Thank you for your guidance, Master. I will definitely comprehend this art seriously. Hongjun bowed. The world created by this technique is a dimensional world. It is innately one level higher than the minor kiliocosm that I created before, and it can withstand 3,000 minor kiliocosms. You may be able to use it to open up a cave and place the purple firmament cave in it. Luo Fan faintly smiled and pointed out. I understand, Hongjun said with a respectful expression. Luo Fan paused for a moment. His mind flickered, and countless words and images flashed across his mind. With a point of his finger, a bit of spiritual light rushed out of his hand and instantly drilled into the space between Hongjuan's eyebrows. It rushed into his sea of consciousness and exploded, turning into countless complicated and mysterious characters and images, merging into his soul and instantly transforming into his memory. Hongjun had already experienced this several times. After accepting this memory, there was a slight look of confusion in his eyes. After a while, he had already finished reading the additional words and pictures in his memory. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he was pleasantly surprised. His expression became excited and he knelt on the ground. Thank you, Master, for your generous gift. With this cultivation technique, this disciple's safety factor will increase by several times. This magic art is comprehended from the sky, splitting earth art. Although it is somewhat mysterious, it only lowers the requirements to use it and weakens its power. There is not much change to its basic origin, Luo Fan said with a faint smile. What Luo Fan transmitted into Hongjuan's memory was a refining technique that he had just comprehended from the art of creating heaven and earth. It contained endless mysteries. It was the invisible heaven and earth technique. The requirements to use this cultivation technique was not as harsh as the art of creation. With Hongjun's current cultivation realm, he could use it completely, although the consumption would not be small. If this cultivation technique was refined into a magic tool, it would instantly make the magic tool possess extremely strong defense power. If this cultivation technique was refined into the magic tool, it would be able to split the invisible void and block all the opponent's attacks. As long as the opponent's attack was unable to break through the restraint of space, they would not be able to harm the cultivator through the magic tool. After obtaining such a mysterious cultivation technique, Hongjun's mind was shaken. Light flashed in his mind. Almost instantly, he decided to refine this cultivation technique into the nine-spirit cloud light handkerchief. The nine-spirit cloud light handkerchief itself was a long robe. After being refined by Hong Jun for a period of time, it already had 36 restrictions. It was only a step away from giving birth to a treasure spirit and becoming a magic tool. If this magic art was added, the power of the nine spiritual cloud radiance handkerchief would skyrocket by 100-fold, transforming from an ordinary magic tool from an ordinary magic tool. It would become a top-grade magic tool that was comparable to the Golden Dragon scissors. There was even a chance that it would give birth to a treasure spirit and become a magic tool. If it could become a magic tool, it would even be stronger than the Void Wuji Palace. With such anticipation in his heart, Hong Jun could not wait to refine this cultivation technique into it. After thanking Luo Fan once more, he bade farewell to him and left. I didn't expect Hong Jun to be able to use Pangu's primordial spirit to comprehend such a cultivation technique. This is really unexpected. After Hong Jun left, Luo Fan continued to comprehend the art of creation and earth. As his comprehension deepened, he gained a lot and couldn't help but praise it in his heart. Although this cultivation technique was many times weaker than Pangu's art of creation and earth, it was thousands of times better than his so-called Void Wuji Palace technique. After comprehending this technique, he gained something. With Luo Fan's current cultivation realm, if he used this cultivation technique to refine a magic tool, he could directly open up a medium-class world. Although the land area of a medium-class world that was opened up in this way wouldn't be too big, a radius of 10,000 feet was the limit. But after all, it was a complete medium-class world. Its ability to withstand space was more than 10 times stronger than the small Kiliacosm inside the Void Wuji Palace. If the magic tool refined by the art of creation and earth was advanced to the magic tool level, it could make the land that this medium-class world could withstand rise to a radius of 100 million miles. Moreover, if he wanted to, it could automatically evolve into 3,000 small Kiliacosms. Perhaps I can integrate this cultivation technique into the Void Wuji Palace technique, or directly integrate the Void Wuji Palace technique into this cultivation technique. Luo Fan had an epiphany in his heart. With this idea, Luo Fan naturally wouldn't hesitate. In his mind, the Void Wuji Palace technique and the art of creation and earth flowed through the two cultivation techniques. At the same time, the earthly immortal Tao fruit in his body exploded and turned into a spiritual power that slowly circulated. With the circulation of the spiritual power, some kind of mysterious change gradually appeared in his mind. With this change, the two cultivation techniques began to continuously collapse and recombine. In the end, they combined into a cultivation technique that had the advantages of both cultivation techniques. It could be used to refine magic tools and could also be used for the art of creation and earth. Its function was 100 times stronger than the invisible heaven and earth technique. Of course, the cultivation realm required was also more than 100 times higher. Even the current Luo Fan could only use a small part of its power. This cultivation technique can be called the infinite method of void. Luo Fan thought to himself. With a slight thought, the mantra of this cultivation technique flowed through his mind. The spiritual power in his body also quickly circulated according to the circulation route of this cultivation technique. As he moved, his body gradually emitted an extremely fierce and unyielding aura. At the same time, endless chaotic energy in the seeking cave continued to gather towards him. Gradually, it condensed into a fist-sized, seemingly solid gray ball in front of him. When the gray ball was successfully condensed, Luo Fan let out a soft cry and raised his hand to slap the air. 81 magical energy units abruptly transformed into 12,960 three-dimensional talismans that were completely different, yet complicated, and as profound as if they contained all the mysteries of the world. They rushed out of his palm, and like rivers flowing into the ocean, they rushed straight into the fist-sized sphere. In an instant, strange and wondrous sounds came from the ball. Cha, ku, one sound after another. It was as if an extremely terrifying, majestic, and sacred existence was being nurtured within it. It also seemed as if there was an infinite, great Tao evolving within it. Oh no, I made a mistake. I didn't expect it to be so strenuous. Luo Fan groaned inwardly at this moment. At the same time, his face became pale and ugly. Although he did not sweat, it was not much different. This cultivation technique did not consume a lot of spiritual power, so Luo Fan could easily endure it. However, the consumption on his mind was almost unimaginable. Even with Luo Fan's terrifyingly powerful spirit, he had still used up all of his spirit in that instant. He could only madly shake his spirit in order to continue using this cultivation technique. It's only 12,960 talismans, and it's already so strenuous. How terrifying would it be if there were a complete 129,600 talismans? Luo Fan was inexplicably shocked. Luo Fan used almost all of his strength to insert the 12,960 three-dimensional talismans into the ball. The intense mental consumption almost made him pass out instantly. When the talismans entered the ball, his mind also rushed into the ball along with the talismans. He saw the earth-shattering evolution that was happening inside the ball. In the center of the gray ball, the 12,960 three-dimensional talismans were intertwined and condensed. Gradually, they shrank into a grayish-brown light in the center of the ball. The speck of light continued to strengthen and expand. In the blink of an eye, it illuminated every inch of the entire ball. The chaotic chi in the ball, which seemed to have condensed into a substance, did not seem to exist. It could not obstruct the grayish-brown light at all. Following that, an explosion that wasn't very strong, but was extremely mysterious, suddenly erupted from within the light. The mysterious sound continued to be produced at this moment. It constantly spread in all directions and gushed out of the ball. The moment the explosion erupted to its limit, the chaotic chi in the center of the light that had condensed to its limit suddenly separated into two parts, one clear and one turbid. The clear chi rose, and the turbid chi sank, creating a small space. This space rapidly expanded and grew with the rapid rise of the clear chi and the rapid fall of the turbid chi. It continued to grow until it was tens of thousands of feet high. Only then did it lose strength and began to shrink even faster. During this process, Luo Fan's mind sank into a very mysterious state. At that moment, there seemed to be countless information flowing through his mind, but it also seemed that nothing had appeared. Oh no, there's not enough chaotic chi and talismans. This world is going to collapse. Suddenly, an indescribable sense of danger arose in Luo Fan's mind and broke that mysterious state. With a move of his mind, Luo Fan's thoughts instantly separated from this newly opened world. At the same time, another 81 magical power units rushed out of his body and drew a mysterious trajectory, forming a mysterious spherical array that instantly wrapped around his body. The moment the formation was formed, the ball floating in front of Luo Fan suddenly collapsed, causing an extremely strong explosion. Even the extremely stable void of the untainted world distorted slightly due to this explosion. A powerful force wreaked havoc in the search cave, turning everything that did not belong to Buzhou Mountain into powder. Chapter 111. Wandering the World 1. The powerful impact that erupted due to the destruction of the world raged in the search cave for a long time. When Luo Fan's mind recovered, the aftermath of the impact gradually subsided. During this process, due to the primordial world's need to repair the void, an endless amount of chaotic chi was devoured. After the impact, even the chaotic chi in the cave became thinner. I actually created a technique that can only be used in the future. Luo Fan looked at the messy search cave and felt helpless. He raised his hand and waved, dispersing the formation that was made up of 81 units of magic power. Although he thought so, he still carefully memorized the Wuji method of the void into his divine soul. However, he could only give up on the idea of using this technique to refine the limitless void palace for now. He could only implement this technique when his cultivation realm improved in the future. This technique could be said to be an upgraded version of the shapeless world technique. The requirements to utilize it were extremely high, yet its might was even stronger as well. The profundities it contained were practically boundless, and it was even closer to the divine ability Panga utilized to split the world apart. If the limitless Void Palace used this technique to refine the minor kiliocosm inside into a major kiliocosm, needless to say, even the limitless boy's ability would increase by more than 100 times. At that time, even the current Luo fan might not be a match for him. Of course, when Luo Fan had the ability to use this technique to refine the limitless Void Palace, Luo Fan's cultivation realm would be countless times stronger than it was now. With the Fire Talisman, Luo Fan's control over the top of Buzhou Mountain within 1,000 miles had reached a level where he could do whatever he wanted. Moreover, he had lived in this cave abode for more than a yuanhui. Thus, he only moved his mind slightly. The cave abode that had already become a mess changed rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, it returned to its original state. Seeing that the cave had returned to normal, Luo Fan stood up and took a step out of the cave. Looking up at the sky and looking down at the earth, the slight sense of defeat caused by the failure of the Imperial Control technique instantly disappeared, and his state of mind returned to indifference and calmness. The current Luo Fan, no matter if it was his cultivation level or mana, had already reached the peak that he could reach at the moment. If he wanted to improve further, he would need to comprehend more about the Tao. As he stood in front of the cave, Luo Fan's eyes flashed with the light of contemplation. In the blink of an eye, he had already decided what to do. Luo Fan had been in the primordial world for more than 100 years, but he had never stepped out of the radius of Buzhou Mountain. Even what he knew about the scenery thousands of miles away from Buzhou Mountain came from the Pai Xiu's memories. He himself had never seen it with his own eyes. From the perspective of the entire primordial world, Luo Fan, who had done so, could be considered an otaku in the primordial world. In front of Hong Jun and the others, Luo Fan seemed to be meticulous, as if he knew everything and was omnipotent. However, in reality, Luo Fan had only obtained the Earth Immortal Tao fruit. Although he was countless times stronger than Hong Jun in terms of cultivation level, he was still in existence of the same level as Hong Jun. Therefore, he needed his own cultivation in order to be able to continue improving and advance on his path of cultivation. With a thought, Luo Fan's mind reflected the scene where Hong Jun was. At that moment, Hong Jun was above the liquefied chaos essence energy at the top of Buzhou Mountain. He was using the various techniques that Luo Fan had taught him to collect the endless chaos essence energy below. His body floated 30 feet above the surface of the liquid. The long robe that he was wearing, which was the 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief, had an extremely terrifying suction force that absorbed the endless chaos essence energy below. Under this suction force, the surface of the chaotic Yuan Qi Ocean was like 100 rivers flowing into the sea. Streams of liquid that looked like gray flood dragons rushed out from the surface of the ocean and continuously rushed into the 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief. According to this speed, during that period of time, the chaos essence energy could almost accumulate into a large lake, which was equivalent to a middle-level chaos essence energy source. This Dharma artifact is really well refined. Luo Fan could not help but exclaim in admiration when he saw the speed at which the 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief absorbed the chaos essence energy. Although the chaos essence energy was only accumulating in the 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief and did not completely integrate into the Dharma artifact, it was extremely rare for it to have such a fast extraction speed. However, it was extremely rare for it to have such a fast extraction speed. It was enough to prove that Hong Jun had spent a lot of effort on this magic tool. After a while, Hong Jun stopped the absorption process. His surroundings returned to calmness, and a faint look of anticipation appeared on his face. With a flash, he turned into a gray rainbow and shot towards the southwest. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared from Luo Fan's sight. He had directly rushed into the ninth layer of the gale, lightning, and fire layer. Hong Jun had achieved enlightenment in the ninth layer of the gale, lightning, and fire layer. He had an incomparable familiarity with the gale, lightning, and fire layer. He even had a special feeling that others could not understand. Therefore, he was not willing to look for the materials that he could find here in other places. Luo Fan shook his head slightly. Originally, he wanted to let Hong Jun temporarily take care of the fire talisman, but it seemed that it was impossible now. With a slight thought, he took a step above the top of Buzhou Mountain and raised his hand gently. From the depths of the chaotic qi liquefied ocean, a black and white light rushed out quickly. In the blink of an eye, it condensed into a man and a woman in front of Luo Fan. "Greetings, Master." These two people were Ao Lai and Ao Yin, who were cultivating below. Luo Fan took a look at the two of them and knew that although they had been following Luo Fu around these days, they did not neglect their cultivation. At this moment, the cultivation of the Golden Serpent Dragon transformation method had reached a higher level, and it had almost reached perfection. The Golden Serpent scissors that they transformed into had also reached the peak of 81 restrictions. They were only one step away from breaking through the Dharma artifact and becoming a Dharma artifact. If the Golden Serpent scissors became a Dharma artifact, their cultivation would be improved substantially. It was even very likely that they would be able to achieve another Earthly Immortals Tao fruit. Now, Ao Lai and Ao Yin were constantly nourishing and refining their bodies in order to make the Golden Serpent scissors a Dharma artifact as soon as possible. They could also achieve the Earthly Immortals Tao fruit. Therefore, Luo Fan could casually summon them. Luo Fan waved his hand and said to them, "I will be traveling for a period of time. I need someone to look after the cave abode. Can the two of you help?" Although Luo Fan used a questioning tone, it was obvious that Ao Lai and Ao Yin would not object to any of Luo Fan's arrangements. Naturally, they immediately bowed and said, "We will look after the cave abode and wait for Master's return." Luo Fan nodded and waved his hand. A golden light rushed out of the cave and landed in Ao Lai's hand in the blink of an eye. It was a fire talisman. Luo Fan smiled and said, "This Dharma artifact contains the authority of the top of Buzhou Mountain. It is of great importance and cannot be lost." Ao Lai held the golden talisman in his hand, and an indescribable feeling surged in his heart. It was as if he had become one with the top of Buzhou Mountain and could control the mountain as he pleased. In an instant, he understood the function and mysteriousness of this talisman. He was extremely grateful that Luo Fan was willing to give him this talisman. Luo Fan nodded and waved his hand. The everlasting void palace that was submerged in the ocean of liquid chaotic energy suddenly rushed out. However, the everlasting void palace's charge was not as small as Ao Lai and Ao Yin's. Instead, it was as if the entire ocean of chaotic energy was being lifted up. In the blink of an eye, the entire ocean of chaotic energy swelled up. Moreover, it gradually rotated and shrank. It was as if the ocean of chaotic energy was leaking into a huge hole. The range of this impact was exactly the range of the whirlpool that Luo Fan had caused when he was cultivating in the limitless Void Palace's mini Kiliacosm. It had only been a few hours since Luo Fan left the everlasting Void Palace. In such a short period of time, it was impossible for the everlasting Void Palace to replenish the energy that it had lost after upgrading its essence. However, since Luo Fan had decided to travel the world, he naturally would not wait here for the magic treasure to completely absorb the energy before setting off. Who knew how many thousands or tens of thousands of years it would take? Since the beginning of time, only objects waited for their masters for such a long time. When had a master ever waited for an object for such a long time? Therefore, Luo Fan decided to directly activate the powerful absorption ability of the everlasting Void Palace. He wanted to absorb enough chaotic energy into the everlasting Void Palace at once. In the future, the everlasting Void Palace would slowly digest this chaotic energy and replenish the energy that it had lost in upgrading its essence. This was how the grand and astonishing scene in front of them was born. Looking at this scene, Aolai and Aoin were dumbfounded, and their eyes were dazzled. To be able to cause such a grand and astonishing change under such a terrifying pressure on the top of Bujo Mountain was enough to prove how amazing Luo Fan's ability was. It was at least 1,000 times greater than theirs compared to him. The speed at which Hong Jun absorbed the chaotic energy was simply child's play. Luo Fan naturally didn't care about how shocked Aolai and Aoin were. His mind was fused with the limitless Void Palace, and he pushed the power of the limitless Void Palace to the limit. The suction force was so strong that it was almost enough to suck a 30 kilometers tall mountain into powder. The entire chaotic energy ocean was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. When the everlasting Void Palace arrived in front of Luo Fan, the huge chaotic energy ocean, which covered an area of tens of thousands of miles, had already shrunk by more than 10 meters. Although it was quickly replenished by the chaotic energy from other places on Bujo Mountain, the amount of chaotic energy consumed had already reached an astronomical figure. Raising his hand to catch the shrinking everlasting Void Palace, Luo Fan smiled faintly. After absorbing the chaotic energy, the everlasting Void Palace would no longer be a problem in the future. Nodding to Aolai and Aoin, Luo Fan made a mental command, and the everlasting Void Palace shook, turned into a purple-yellow light, wrapped Luo Fan's body, and rushed down along the top of Bujo Mountain, disappearing from the range of Aolai and Aoin's perception in the blink of an eye. Looking at Luo Fan's disappearing figure, Aoin asked Aolai, who still had a yearning look on his face, "Damn it, what should we do now? What else can we do?" "Cultivate hard and strive to master the Golden Jiao Dragon transforming method as soon as possible." Aolai came back to his senses and said matter-of-factly, "Then, what should we do about the task of guarding the abode?" Aoin asked with a frown. "In the current situation of the untainted land, even the innate gods are muddle-headed. In a few periods, it is already rare for an innate god to come here. Why do we need to guard it? But, after all, this is the task of the untainted land, so it is not good to do nothing. Well, let's set up an early warning array in the surroundings." Aolai smiled faintly. Chapter 112. Around the world, 2. Now, the flying speed of the Wuji Palace had reached an unimaginable level. It crossed the void, almost like teleportation. In the blink of an eye, it was thousands of miles, tens of thousands of miles. Luo Fan drove the Wuji Palace straight down from the top of Bujo Mountain. In a short while, he arrived at the foot of Bujo Mountain. With a swoosh, he drew a smooth and exaggerated arc in the air, and his direction changed from vertical to horizontal. Passing by the foot of the mountain, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and his mind scanned the location of the god of Bujo Mountain. The location looked the same as before, in the shape of a big stone. However, the power inside it was surging, and all kinds of mysterious auras were coming out from it. Mysterious three-dimensional talismans flashed inside it. With just one glance, Luo Fan could tell that the god of Bujo Mountain was refining the method of the second body that he had comprehended under his guidance. Naturally, Luo Fan was not in the mood to chat with the god of Bujo Mountain. Without stopping, he randomly chose a direction and flew away with the Wuji Palace. At this moment, it had only been 2 periods since Pangu created the world. This period of time was an extremely long period of time in other worlds, and it had probably gone through several cycles of reincarnation. However, in the untainted land, it was an extremely short period of time, and the evolution of the untainted land was still going on. Luo Fan had traveled within a radius of 10 million miles from Bujo Mountain more than a period of time ago. However, now that he was walking on the land again, he found that the terrain within a radius of 10 million miles had changed greatly. Moreover, compared to more than a period of time ago, there were countless more vitality on the land within this area. Looking at the wonderful scene within this area, Luo Fan felt something. Unknowingly, he slowed down the flying speed of the Wuji Palace and began to carefully savor the way of evolution of the world revealed in the violent changes of the untainted land. As he carefully savored and comprehended it, the world of his sea of consciousness gradually underwent subtle changes. The change was not obvious, and there were no traces to be found. It was like a spring breeze blowing across the earth, causing the earth to suddenly return to spring and produce endless vitality. It was definitely not changing according to the surrounding terrain of Buzhou Mountain, nor was it constantly evolving the terrain of the sea of consciousness world to the surrounding terrain of Buzhou Mountain. On the contrary, the topography of the sea of consciousness was constantly evolving in a different direction from the topography of Buzhou Mountain. The difference between the topography of the sea of consciousness world and the surrounding topography of Buzhou Mountain became more and more obvious. At the same time, it also became more and more natural, more and more like the naturally evolved Earth. This entire process had occurred unintentionally by Luo Fan, and even he himself was practically unable to notice such a change. It could be predicted that by the time he discovered the changes in his sea of consciousness, the changes would have already made the entire sea of consciousness even more profound and natural. It was not only Luo Fan's sea of consciousness that had changed due to the changes in the various topography of the primordial world. In fact, the biggest change was Luo Fan's state of mind. Luo Fan had been in the primordial world for more than 100 years. This time, it was the first time that Luo Fan was so relaxed and so focused on traveling around. As he traveled, he gradually let go of the faint pressure that had been hidden in his heart since he came to the primordial world. As a result, his mind became more and more relaxed and more open. Even the Tao realm that he had just made progress and stabilized was a little loose because of this. Although there was not much improvement, he was not far from it. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. In these 3 years, Luo Fan did as he pleased. He did not have a fixed direction, nor did he have a constant speed. He walked, stopped, went straight, or turned. He followed the feelings in his heart. If he saw a heavenly treasure that he was interested in, he would not stand on ceremony and casually put it into the universe in his sleeve. When he saw a beautiful or magnificent place, he did not have any scruples and directly stayed there for a few days or even more than 10 days. Sometimes, on a whim, he would even leave a few basic cultivation techniques at the place where he had once lived. As for whether these techniques would allow some living beings to step onto the path of Tao or change the fate of some living beings, he did not care. After walking in this manner for a full 3 years, he had walked less than 100 million miles. One had to know that if he flew at full speed, he would only need a few days to cross this 100 million kilometers. Walking so slowly, his comprehension would naturally not be small. In 3 years, his sea of consciousness had already undergone earth-shattering changes. The terrain around Buzhou Mountain, which had shrunk to a radius of 10 million miles, had now become completely different from this area. In it, there was no trace of chisel marks. It looked extremely natural and mysterious, like a world that was born naturally, like a terrain that was naturally evolved by heaven and earth. At this moment, no matter how familiar people were with the terrain around Buzhou Mountain, it was difficult for them to see the traces of the terrain around Buzhou Mountain in his sea of consciousness. Apart from that, although Luo Fan only collected heavenly treasures that he was interested in and rare, after walking for 3 years, the heavenly treasures that he was interested in his universe in his sleeve had already accumulated into a mountain that was tens of thousands of feet high. On this day, with a relaxed expression, Luo Fan was half lying on a purple-yellow auspicious cloud, drifting slowly in the void hundreds of feet above the ground. This auspicious cloud was naturally condensed by the purple-yellow light of the Wuji Palace. This was just a change in appearance, but it did not affect its function, nor did it contain any mystery. Needless to say, there was no need to talk about it. Just as he was enjoying the gentle breeze and the pleasant feeling brought about by the gentle flow of Yuan Qi, suddenly, there was an extremely strange heat coming from afar. It made him, who was already immune to cold and heat and was not afraid of fire and water, suddenly feel a burst of heat in his body. With a slight thought, the place where the heat came from was reflected in Luo Fan's mind. It's actually a mountain range condensed by flames? When Luo Fan saw the location clearly, he could not help but be astonished. The source of the heat was nearly 100,000 miles away. It was a vast and long mountain range condensed by endless flames. Seeing such a strange and interesting scene, Luo Fan naturally wouldn't continue to leisurely enjoy the pleasant feeling of the breeze. With a thought, the purplish-yellow auspicious cloud formed by the limitless void palace suddenly shook, and its speed increased dramatically. It drew a long purplish-yellow afterimage in the air, and after a while, it brought Luo Fan to the side of the blazing mountain. At this point, Luo Fan could clearly see the entire blazing mountain. He could clearly see how vast the blazing mountain was. 80,000 miles, the highest peak is 360,000 feet, surrounded by strange flames. There's actually such a strange mountain in the untainted land. Luo Fan was amazed. The reason why he could not see how wide and long the fiery mountain was when he was nearly 100,000 miles away was because he did not use the Wuji Palace to enhance his perception. Therefore, his perception range was limited, and he could not sense the end of the fiery mountain from that position. Standing up, he raised his hand and gently waved. An invisible force suddenly appeared, wrapping around the flame at the edge of the mountain of flames. It made the burning flame float up and float above his palm. It slowly rotated and gradually turned into a small fireball the size of a thumb. With a slight thought, 2 golden lights shot out from his eyes, covering the small fireball. In an instant, with the help of the divine sense that could see through the origin, Luo Fan saw through the origin of the fireball. The composition, shape, temperature, and all the other mysteries of the fireball appeared in his mind. After analyzing, Luo Fan was even more surprised, because he didn't know what kind of flame it was. In his memory, there was a lot of common knowledge about the untainted land left by Pan Gu's original spirit before it dissipated. There were countless shapes and characteristics of flames, but none of them matched the flame in front of him. How could he not be surprised? The temperature of this flame was extremely high. According to the temperature unit of the Earth in the future, it was probably over 100,000 degrees Celsius. Its texture was also quite strange. Although it was a flame, it had some characteristics of a solid body, such as its degree of condensation and completeness. Moreover, what made Luo Fan even more puzzled was that this flame actually seemed to contain a very strange spirituality. This spirituality was very simple and vague. It seemed to be able to barely control the flame to maintain its complete form, and had no other functions. But it was spirituality, after all, a rare spirituality in the untainted land. This flame is not as good as the Taoist fire, but it has its own mysteries. I wonder what its source is. Luo Fan exclaimed in his heart. He raised his hand and waved. The fireball scattered and turned into specks of light that fell down. It was as if it was sucked by an invisible force, and it was thrown back into the 80,000 miles of flaming mountain in front of him. This was the effect of the spirituality. Seeing such a strange change, Luo Fan had already expected it, so he was not surprised. He moved his mind, and the Wuji Void Palace shook slightly. In an instant, he felt that he had merged with the Wuji Void Palace, and his perception increased by hundreds of times. He was using the Wuji Void Palace to increase his perception. Through this increase, Luo Fan instantly felt that a radius of 1 million miles was reflected in his mind. Everything within a radius of 1 million miles was extremely clear and detailed. It could be said that everything, big or small, was presented in his mind without a single detail. Compared to before, this was obviously a great improvement. Among them, Luo Fan's cultivation had been improved, and the expansion of his perception range was only one of the reasons. Another more important reason was that after the Wuji Void Palace had been refined over these days and obtained a qualitative improvement, the effect of the increase in perception was several times more than before. Of course, the actual improvement was not too exaggerated. In the past, the limitless Void Palace had been able to increase Luo Fan's perception by nearly 15 times, calculated according to the length, increasing Luo Fan's perception from a radius of 20,000 kilometers to a radius of 300,000 kilometers, a radius of 1 million kilometers. It was like a radar scanning method. Only the area within a radius of 300,000 kilometers could be reflected in one's mind. If you have any questions, please see the chapter on Wuji Void Palace's Dharma Treasure. Now, Luo Fan's perception range had increased to 100,000 miles, and after the increase, it was 1 million miles. In total, the increase was reduced to 10 times. Of course, the increase in area was several times more than before, and that was naturally an improvement. With the help of the Wuji Void Palace's increase, Luo Fan's mind moved, and his perception broke through the incomparably hot flaming mountain. He penetrated into the bottom of the flaming mountain, trying to find the source of the flaming mountain. 100 miles, 200 miles, 300 miles, 400 miles, 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles. Chapter 1:13. Flaming lion head under this extremely vast flaming mountain. It was not the ground, but a deep pit that was thousands of miles deep. In the whole pit, there was no physical substance. It was filled with flames that Luo Fan could not recognize. It was just that the density was different and the quality was not the same. The deeper he went, the thicker the density and the better the quality. Moreover, what was even more unexpected was that the obstruction caused by the flames to his perception was even greater than the obstruction caused by the earth. With the help of the perception of the Wuji Void Palace, he explored more than 4,000 miles and incredibly felt a little weak. With great difficulty, Luo Fan brought the 4,900 kilometers underground into his perception. After reflecting it in his mind, Luo Fan finally couldn't go any further. In the end, he couldn't break through the 5,000-kilometer mark, and the 4,900 miles deep underground happened to be the end of the flames of the flaming mountain. If he went deeper from there, he would already be at the place where the yellow spring flowed through almost the entire untainted land. This kind of flame has the aura of chaos, and also has the characteristics of condensing and not dissipating. It also has the characteristics of spirituality. I wonder what kind of flame it is. If I use it to refine weapons, it seems to have a special use. Luo Fan's heart moved slightly, and the Wuji Void Palace turned into a faint purplish-yellow light that covered his body. Then his figure floated, and in the blink of an eye, he landed on the highest peak of the flaming mountain, which was 360,000 feet high. Stepping on the flaming mountain, the feeling was like stepping on a soft mattress, but there was no feeling of stepping on the flames at all. However, the temperature was quite shocking. The temperature of tens of thousands of degrees Celsius was still attacking him from all directions. Even with the protection of the Wuji Void Palace, Luo Fan could still feel the difference in the surrounding temperature. There's a flame core here. Maybe I can understand the nature of the flame through this core. Luo Fan's thoughts flashed, and he found a cluster of flames that was thousands of times more condensed than the other locations at a position 3,600 kilometers below the peak. It was obviously some kind of core. In fact, it wasn't rare to see this kind of fire body at the bottom of the blazing mountains. At that moment, Luo Fan could see that the number had reached 81. However, the one Luo Fan had chosen was the largest and most condensed one among the 81 flames. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. Out of nowhere, an invisible force directly acted on the core of the ball of flames. Then, with a thought, he pulled the core of the flame up. In his mind, this should be a very simple matter. After all, although the flaming mountain had an extremely strong blocking effect on perception, it was still an existence that existed between an illusory entity and a physical entity. It was impossible for it to have a strong hindrance to his power. However, the development of the matter had once again exceeded his expectations. The moment the invisible force increased, an unimaginably huge resistance suddenly appeared. This huge resistance made Luo Fan's incorporeal power seem like a dragonfly trying to shake a pillar, unable to shake the core of the flame in the slightest. Even the flames above the core of the flame did not distort because of his power. Why is this happening? Luo Fan was even more surprised. Ever since he came to this flaming mountain, many unexpected things had happened one after another. The situation had already made Luo Fan more and more puzzled, and he felt that things were getting more and more strange. Who is it? How dare you touch my core? At this moment, an extremely loud voice suddenly sounded from all directions in the void and directly poured into Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan frowned and was secretly surprised. Ever since he came to this untainted land, the strongest existence that Luo Fan had encountered was only Hong Jun. To him, Hong Jun was just an existence that he could casually destroy, and it was impossible for him to hide from his perception. However, at this moment, he did not feel any existence approaching at all, nor did he feel any energy fluctuations. This voice, which was obviously aimed at him, suddenly appeared. How could he not be surprised? Sensing this change, Luo Fan felt an indescribable excitement after being surprised and puzzled. I finally met an existence that I can communicate with. My decision to travel around the world this time is really wise. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. After dispersing the incorporeal power, he was about to explain when he found that the flaming mountain under his feet had suddenly undergone a drastic change. In the blink of an eye, the 360,000 zhang high, flaming mountain suddenly split into two sides, constantly twisting and deforming. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a huge, flaming lion head. The two eyes of the flaming lion head were two blazing white flame cores. In the huge head of the lion head, there was the largest flame core that Luo Fan had ever seen, which was wrapped in it like a brain. Under the illumination of the endless red flames, this image was vivid and full of a pressure that could suppress the world. Seeing this change, Luo Fan also dispelled the idea of explaining. His body shook, and the purplish-yellow light of the Void Wuji Palace wrapped around his body. Like a swimming fish, he dodged the attacks of the huge lion head again and again. In the blink of an eye, after dodging hundreds of attacks, Luo Fan was already thousands of miles high in the sky. However, the huge lion head below still didn't relax. Its lower body was like a long snake that was connected to the vast mountain of flames. Its two huge front legs spread open, and its mouth opened to the widest, letting out a roar that shook the void. It didn't stop for a moment as it continuously pounced towards Luo Fan. The temperature of the flames also increased a lot. By now, the temperature had reached the level where it could ignite the innate vitality in the surroundings. The blazing flames wrapped around it, making the image of the huge, flaming lion even more majestic and shocking. Through the test just now, Luo Fan already knew the speed and strength of the flaming lion head. He knew that the existence itself was a kind of existence that was only slightly weaker than him. It would take him some effort to subdue it, but if he used a magic treasure, he could easily kill in seconds. Therefore, he was also relieved. With a thought, the purplish-yellow light of the Void Wuji Palace condensed and drilled into the space between his eyebrows. In the blink of an eye, it came into the world of his sea of consciousness, turned back into the Void Wuji Palace, and quietly landed next to his divine soul. It was not easy to meet an existence that could be mentioned in the same breath as him in terms of cultivation realm. It just happened that he could use it to accumulate combat experience. If it was so easy to kill in seconds, wouldn't it be a reckless waste of God's gift? After taking back the magic treasure, Luo Fan's mind turned, and a mantra flowed through his mind. With the mantra, his body suddenly soared. In the blink of an eye, he grew to a height of 100,000 feet. The world of Dharma form was a kind of magic that could change the size of one's body. In fact, the innate Taoism body itself had such a magic. However, the magic of the innate Taoism body itself could only change the size of 1 foot to 100 feet at most. If Luo Fan wanted to change the size of this huge, flaming lion head, he only needed to use his mind and willpower to guard an ordinary magic art that he had created. Seeing that Luo Fan's body suddenly grew so much, the flaming lion head was shocked. There is such a magic art. Let me see what other tricks you have to snatch food from tiger's mouth. The huge and shocking voice came from the lion head. After that, without waiting for Luo Fan to answer, its body flashed, and the two huge front claws of the flaming lion suddenly rushed forward, separated, and condensed, turning into 10 huge fire dragons in the air, forming a huge and mysterious rune shape in the air. In an instant, it wrapped Luo Fan in it. The moment the fire dragons appeared, Luo Fan knew that this attack was not simple. But when the fire dragons really appeared, he was still a little shocked. This was because he had never seen this huge rune before, but there was a strong spatial pressure in it, even faintly suppressing the Dharma power in his body. This was an extremely rare situation. It should be known that ever since the Dharma power in Luo Fan's body appeared, it was almost omnipotent. As long as he used his Dharma power, he would almost always be successful. When had he ever seen a situation where his Dharma power was suppressed? But this made him even more excited. If there was no pressure in the battle, how could he improve? With a slight thought, the mnemonic mantras flowed through his mind and willpower. The Dharma power in his body shook, and he got rid of the faint spatial pressure. With another turn, a Dharma power unit turned into a huge spherical three-dimensional talisman and rushed out of his palm. In the blink of an eye, it expanded by tens of thousands of times, turning into a blue sphere that was close to 3 million feet in size. It spun, split, and turned into 10 huge water dragons that rushed up toward the 10 fire dragons that were arranged in the shape of giant runes. Squeak, 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 squeak. The water and fire intersected, and there was a huge change. Countless white mist was emitted from the point of contact. Although the fire was not ordinary fire and could not be extinguished so easily, the water dragons that Luo Fan sent out were not ordinary water either. They were a kind of real water that was condensed from the essence of the Gue water, which had been infused with his willpower. Only a small drop of this real water could turn into a small lake. If these 10 water dragons were transformed, they could fill up a river that was 800 miles wide. Poof! The space shook, and the 10 fire dragons and 10 water dragons were annihilated in an instant. Without the fire dragons, the huge rune that could slightly suppress Luo Fan's Dharma power could no longer exist, and it instantly collapsed and dissipated. Good! The flaming lion cheered, and there was a hint of excitement in its voice. When Luo Fan heard this, he knew that the flaming lion was also eager to hunt. It knew that it was a rare opponent, so it deliberately provoked a fight. This was also true. With the cultivation realm of Luo Fan and this existence, they were already at the peak level in the untainted land. It was difficult to find someone at the same level as them to communicate with. Now that he could meet one, Luo Fan could not help but be tempted, let alone this existence that was one level lower than Luo Fan. Chapter 114. Nine-headed lion burns the heavens at this moment. The flaming lion that had already lost its 2 giant forelimbs trembled slightly. It opened its mouth wide and sucked in deeply. The 10 fire dragons that had been annihilated by the Gue water essence were reborn from the void and gathered towards the flaming lion. In the blink of an eye, all of them were sucked into its mouth. As these dim fire dragons entered its mouth, the flaming lion's 2 forelimbs rapidly regrew, and in the blink of an eye, it returned to its original state. Roar! After regrowing its 2 forelimbs, the flaming lion let out a deafening roar towards the sky. The roar shook the heavens and the earth, as if millions of thunderbolts had suddenly appeared between heaven and earth. With this roar, the flaming mountain range below twisted and changed. In the blink of an eye, 81 flaming lions that were slightly smaller than the flaming lion, but were still incomparably large, suddenly took shape. They drew 81 mysterious trajectories, charging towards Luo Fan from every angle and direction. Seeing this change, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly. He grasped at the void with both hands, and the astral wind, lightning, and fire layer above 90,000 kilometers changed. Countless strands of astral energy, like when a heavenly tribulation was triggered, directly traversed the void and appeared between his hands as if teleporting, constantly accumulating and constantly compressing. Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and an extremely complex and profound three-dimensional seal flashed between his hands, constantly refining and condensing the astral energy that had gathered. In the blink of an eye, the innumerable strands of astral energy had transformed into an incomparably large, incomparably tough, and incomparably heavy halberd. With a wave of his hand, this exaggerated halberd drew a mysterious trajectory in the void, as if it had pierced through the void. This trajectory produced 81 halberd heads, and at the same time, they appeared in front of the 81 giant flaming lions, bringing with them an incomparable fighting spirit that contained indescribable mysteries, directly smashing towards the 81 fiercely pouncing lions. The 81 flaming lions naturally would not be courteous in the face of this attack. They displayed all kinds of remarkable abilities, such as their claws madly clawing or spitting out flames, or slamming their bodies against each other, or condensing void yuan qi to create explosions, and so on and so forth. All kinds of strange attacks directly smashed toward the 81 halberd heads that had suddenly appeared in front of them. Boom, boom, boom. Kacha-kacha. Pa-pa-pa-pa. Voila. Endless strange sounds filled the void, and incomparably powerful shockwaves surged through the void, stirring up the Xiantian yuan qi and chaotic yuan qi in the void, creating an incomparably explosive visual effect. The 81 flaming lions and the heavenly halberd were locked in a stalemate. They were actually equally matched. Luo Fan casually waved his heavenly halberd, and between each of his movements, endless mysteries were revealed. Almost every movement seemed to contain a profound martial art that had been practiced countless times and had been tempered thousands of times. Throughout the entire process, he seemed to be very relaxed. His body crossed the void, as if he was strolling on the earth, and at the same time, there was a faint smile on his lips, as if he was enjoying an infinite delicacy. What he was using at this time was not some kind of divine ability, nor was it any kind of technique. It was just the principles of martial arts that he had comprehended from the Lesser Thousand World inside the Wuji Palace. Luo Fan's cultivation was far stronger than anyone in the Lesser Thousand World. The people of the Lesser Thousand World had spent countless generations exploring and cultivating, creating all kinds of martial arts, but with just a glance, he could completely see through them, and with just a thought, he could deduce these martial arts to the limit, and even surpass the limit. After living in the Lin family fortress for 8 years, Luo Fan had already explored the origin of martial arts and comprehended the supreme principles of martial arts in his spare time. At this time, when he casually used it in a battle, it was always successful. As the battle continued, Luo Fan got to know his opponent better and better. After a big half a day, he believed that he had completely understood his opponent. The cultivation and realm of the opponent in front of him were only slightly inferior to Luo Fan's. But in terms of fighting ability, offensive methods, and defensive methods, he was far inferior to Luo Fan. There was even an insurmountable gap between them. During the big half a day of battle, it seemed that he had used countless kinds of attacks and magics, but in fact, all those attacks and magics originated from only 9 kinds of magic. The reason why they looked so beautiful, as if there were countless types of magic, was that he had developed the functions of these 9 types of magic to the limit and derived countless application magics, with these 9 types of magic as the source. What a shame. This man is indeed at a high cultivation, but I think he hasn't gained much from Pangu's primordial spirit. Luo Fan sighed silently. Pangu's primordial spirit would never be stingy to those who were smart and had a complete mind. As long as one wanted it, as long as one wanted to understand it, one could certainly gain something from it. The fact that this man had so few magics proved Luo Fan's point of view, whether he had learned them from Pangu's primordial spirit or by himself. He moved the halberd to his right hand, emptied his left hand, and clapped in the air. 81 three-dimensional spell talismans darted out of his palm. These talismans grew as fast as the wind, crazily absorbing all kinds of energies in the air, such as earth power, evil power, thunder power, chaotic power, pre-world power. All these energies were condensed into a part of these talismans without being picky. Within a blink of an eye, these 81 talismans all expanded to over 100,000 meters, as big as the 81 flaming lions. At the same time, he slightly shook his right hand and spun the halberd, releasing 81 killing moves. Instantly, the 81 flaming lions were forced to dodge towards the 81 talismans. In an instant, the 81 flaming lions were completely wrapped up by the 81 talismans. All of a sudden, these 81 talismans burst with dazzling lights of various colors and turned into black holes, drawing inexhaustible amounts of pre-world power, chaotic power, and other energies from the air and ascending them into them. During this process, their sizes were constantly shrinking. Not long after, the terrifying suction force that was like a black hole disappeared, and the 81 three-dimensional talismans turned into 81 spherical seals that were thousands of meters in diameter. They floated around Luo Fan's body and slowly rotated like planets revolving around the sun. The 81 spherical seals shook for a long while before they gradually calmed down. What kind of divine ability is this? It's so mysterious that it can seal my soul. After the shaking subsided, a muffled voice came from the 81 seals. Luo Fan smiled and said, "It's just an ordinary, inescapable net technique. I wonder if you can break through it?" The inescapable net technique is pretty good. However, you don't seem to be able to unleash the full power of this technique. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to speak so easily. As soon as the voice finished speaking, there was a sudden burst of tremendous power. Clearly, when he spoke, he was gathering his power, and now all the power he had gathered exploded in an instant. Puff, 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 puff. Soft sounds rang out, and a scorching heat gushed out. In the blink of an eye, the force caused the 81 spherical seals to explode. The bright red flame illuminated the void around Luo Fan's body, turning it red. The scorching temperature caused the void around Luo Fan's body to seem exceptionally illusory and distorted. That scene was extremely dangerous for Luo Fan. However, Luo Fan's complexion remained unchanged. He simply raised his hand and waved it, recalling the shattered seal back. With a light pinch, the power that formed the seal instantly dissipated. After that, he didn't make any more movements. "Why didn't you dodge?" A slightly depressed and doubtful voice rang out from the bright red flames. "Since you no longer have the will to fight, why should I dodge?" Luo Fan smiled. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the surrounding flames paused for a moment. Then, they continuously surged and gradually gathered in front of Luo Fan. Not long after, they condensed in front of Luo Fan, forming a huge, grayish-white, nine-headed lion. It did not look like it was made of flames, but rather, it looked like it was made of flesh and blood. The form of the nine-headed lion was definitely powerful and peerless. However, if its expression was not so depressed and resentful, this kind of power and peerless power would be many times stronger. I did not expect to meet such a powerful opponent for the first time. It is really lucky. The nine-headed lion looked at Luo Fan and said, "The nine-headed lion had one big head and 8 small heads. The big head was in the center, and the 8 small heads are distributed on both sides of the neck, for on each side. The one who spoke was the biggest head in the middle. I am Luo Fan. How should I address you?" Luo Fan smiled and said. Hearing that, the nine-headed lion's expression turned solemn. It bowed slightly, in other words, slightly lowered its head, and said, "I am Fun Tian. Greetings, my friend." Luo Fan naturally would not neglect an existence that could be mentioned in the same breath as him in terms of cultivation realm. He also bowed back very solemnly. After the greeting, Luo Fan stared at Fantian and said, "I have been looking for you for many years." Fantian was slightly taken aback. Then, he revealed a faint smile and said, I have been waiting for you for many years." The 20 eyes of the two of them looked at each other for a while. Suddenly, they burst into laughter at the same time. Their voices revealed an indescribable emotion. It seemed to be the joy of finding a soulmate, the joy of meeting the same kind, and also the endless loneliness. The two of them laughed for a while. Funtion took the lead and brought Luo Fan down. Not long after, they landed in the middle of the blazing mountain. However, after losing the flames on the nine-headed lion's body, the blazing mountain turned into a deep pit that was 2,000 miles deep. At the bottom of the pit, bright red flames flowed like magma. Obviously, the nine-headed lion was not Funtion. Although it was not all of Funtion's power, it still took up nearly half of his power. Chapter 115. Primordial Spirit, Great Tao in the blink of an eye. The entire blazing mountain range had returned to the state that Luo Fan had seen before. Seeing such a change, Luo Fan was not in a hurry. Seeing how happy Funtion was when he met him previously, he naturally could not leave him here and not care about him. With a thought, his 100,000-meter-tall body slowly shrank, and in a short while, it shrank to its original height of 8 feet. With a wave of his hand, countless baleful aura gathered in the air, and in the blink of an eye, it transformed into a white cloud beneath his feet, supporting his body and floating in midair. Since he already knew that the blazing mountain was related to Funtion and was even most likely Funtion's primordial spirit, Luo Fan could not stand on it directly. After standing on the cloud for a while, the space in front of him rippled, and suddenly, a 10-meter-tall black light screen appeared. Following that, the black light screen split open from the middle and slowly split open to both sides. In the blink of an eye, a door that was neither too big nor too small appeared. Through the door, there was a small world that looked like a fairyland. High mountains and flowing rivers, peach gardens and bamboo forests. Boundless primordial energy turned into mist and covered the entire ground. Other than the absence of immortal cranes and the like, the entire world was almost exactly the same as the legendary immortal cave abode. "It's my fault for making you wait for so long. Fellow Taoist, please." At this moment, sparks suddenly appeared in the sky behind the door and gathered in front of Luo Fan, forming a 3-meter-tall, 9-headed lion. "It really is an immortal cave abode. The scenery is different." Luo Fan nodded slightly and praised. This small world was obviously a cave abode hidden in the void. The scenery was as beautiful as a fairyland, but that was secondary. What made Luo Fan even more impressed was the efficiency of the cave abode's vitality transformation. A qualified cave abode should be able to convert the vitality of the outside world into the vitality that the owner of the cave needed. If one wanted to become a high-grade cave abode, they would need to create a complete lesser chiliocosm and be able to produce the vitality that the owner of the cave needed. The cave in front of him was naturally just an ordinary cave. It was naturally impossible for it to reach the level of a complete minor chiliocosm. However, this cave abode was able to convert the innate chi, stellar chi, malevolent chi, and even the heavy impure yin chi underground into chaotic chi. The chaotic yuan chi mist that had accumulated in the cave mansion was formed from the various energies that the cave mansion had absorbed from the outside world. Moreover, the efficiency was quite high, and the loss rate was only half. At Funtion's current realm, it was almost the limit. The cave that Funtion had opened up was originally his proudest method, and after receiving the praise from Luo Fan, who was even stronger than him, his heart was filled with joy. The 9 lion heads all revealed uncontrollable smiles. When Luo Fan stepped into the cave abode, he felt a feeling that was different from the primordial world surging into his mind. The spatial strength of the cave abode was far inferior to that of the primordial world. It was even inferior to his minor chiliocosm. However, the entire cave abode was enveloped in an extremely strange aura. This aura had the effect of calming one's heart and suppressing inner demons. It filled the entire heaven and earth of the cave abode, causing it to be extremely suitable for cultivation. I wonder what item you used to suppress this cave abode. It actually has the ability to calm one's heart and suppress inner demons. Luo Fan asked Fan Tian with some surprise. Fellow Taoist, you are indeed extraordinary. You actually discovered the crux of the matter immediately. Fan Tian was greatly impressed by Luo Fan's ability to notice the extraordinariness of the cave abode so quickly. This is it. As he spoke, one of the lion heads swayed, and the void changed. In the blink of an eye, a 12-stage green lotus that was hidden in the void slowly appeared in front of Luo Fan. This item is really a pity. Luo Fan looked at the 12th-stage green lotus, but did not praise it. Instead, he sighed. It is indeed a pity. Fan Tian was actually not dissatisfied, and sighed as well. In fact, the moment Luo Fan saw the 12th-stage green lotus, he knew that the 12th-stage green lotus was an innate god. However, at the critical moment when this innate god's spiritual consciousness was taking shape, due to the lack of primal chaos chi, the spiritual consciousness that was taking shape dissipated once again, causing its body to become a material for refining weapons. His experience was very similar to that of Luo Fan's new disciple, Guangpu. It was just that Guangpu was lucky to have met Luo Fan at that time, while the 12th-stage green lotus did not meet an existence that could give it pointers. In this world, I wonder how many spiritual consciousnesses have encountered the same misfortune as it. It's really a pity. Luo Fan sighed and raised his hand. A wave of chi was produced from the void and brushed past the 12th-stage green lotus, causing it to shake slightly. In the blink of an eye, it seemed to have become even more lively. Back then, when I discovered this 12th-stage green lotus, I thought that I had met a companion. I worked hard to water it and waited for tens of thousands of years before giving up helplessly. In the end, because I needed a spiritual object to suppress the opening of the cave abode, I suppressed it within the cave abode, hoping that after countless years of being watered by the chaotic energy, its spiritual consciousness would be able to be reborn so that it would not be a waste to meet it. Fan Tian sighed. His innate spiritual consciousness has already dissipated. Even if his spiritual consciousness were to be reborn, it would have become post-celestial and would no longer be the same as us. What's the point of watering it again? Luo Fan turned his head and said to Fan Tian, "How could I not know? I'm just trying my best." Fan Tian looked helpless. One of the lion heads swayed, and the 12th-stage green lotus once again disappeared into the depths of the cave. Hearing Fan Tian's words, although Luo Fan did not think much of it, he did not continue to dwell on the problem of the 12th-stage green lotus. The primordial world was so vast, and there were naturally countless innate gods. However, only a few of them were able to take shape in the end. If every time he encountered an innate god that had failed to evolve, he would have to try his best to irrigate the innate god to regenerate his spiritual consciousness. Fan Tian also knew that Luo Fan did not think much of it, so he did not pester him any further. After leading Luo Fan to take a look at his cave, he invited Luo Fan into the guest hall that he had opened up. After the guest and host sat down, Fan Tian could no longer hold it in and asked, "I wonder what kind of sacred art you use to seal my primordial spirit? It's actually so mysterious." Luo Fan smiled slightly. Without saying a word, he raised his hand and pointed. A speck of spiritual light rushed out from his finger. It exploded in mid-air, and with a roll, it absorbed the dense primal chaos chi in the cave and condensed into a huge scroll. On it, countless complicated words and patterns appeared. Impressively, it was the cultivation secrets of the inescapable net technique. How could Fan Tian have thought that Luo Fan would be so generous? He had only asked a few questions, and Luo Fan had actually revealed the cultivation method and its mysteries. At the same time that he was overjoyed, he also felt a deep sense of admiration for Luo Fan, and a feeling of mutual appreciation arose in his heart. To the innate gods, they definitely knew the words that Pangu had created. Therefore, Fan Tian did not have any difficulty reading the words that Luo Fan used. His 9 heads started moving at the same time. In the blink of an eye, he had completely memorized the inescapable net technique and had even understood it by heart. This inescapable net technique was rather profound, and it contained boundless profundities, so there was naturally no need to elaborate further. However, compared to Fun Tion's cultivation realm, it could be considered a very low-level thing. Naturally, he could comprehend it without any obstacles. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It's simply wonderful. After comprehending the inescapable net technique, Fun Tion said the word wonderful 3 times in a row. In the end, he even made a comment that was too wonderful for words. This technique was nothing compared to his current cultivation realm. However, the mysteries that it revealed had an indescribable effect on him, as though he had seen a whole new world. This technique is just a small trick. However, I am very interested in the primordial spirit that you are cultivating. I wonder what is the primordial spirit that you're talking about. Luo Fan laughed without a care and asked. Naturally, Luo Fan had heard of the term primordial spirit before. In the novels that he had read before he transmigrated, there were hundreds and thousands of ways to cultivate the primordial spirit. Therefore, with the gift from Pangu's primordial spirit before it dissipated, there were hundreds and thousands of ways to cultivate the primordial spirit in his mind. However, the primordial spirit that was cultivated with each method was different from the other methods, and its power was also different. Moreover, even the strongest primordial spirit was far inferior to Fun Tion's flaming lion just now. This technique is the primordial spirit Great Tao that I created. Although it is shallow, it contains many mysteries. Fun Tion smiled slightly and said humbly and proudly. After saying that, he turned his body and turned into a huge ball of flames. With another turn, he condensed a small mountain range, and then turned into a 12th-stage green lotus. With another turn, he turned into an auspicious cloud. In a short while, it had transformed into hundreds of different forms. This primordial spirit could actually transform endlessly. Moreover, every time it transformed into a form, although it was made of flames, it would have the characteristics of a form. When it transformed into a mountain range, it looked like a slightly special mountain range. It contained a stable, and heavy aura. When it transformed into a 12th-stage green lotus, it was a 12th-stage green lotus that was formed from flames. It contained an aura that could calm one's heart and suppress one's inner demons. When it transformed into an auspicious cloud, it floated in the air just like a real auspicious cloud that soared in the sky. The primordial spirit Great Tao is actually so mysterious. Although it is not as good as the Tao fruit Great Tao, it is many times better than my hundreds and thousands of primordial spirit cultivation methods. The more Luo Fan looked, the more shocked he was. In the end, Fun Tion transformed back into the form of a 9-headed lion and landed in front of Luo Fan. Through the previous battle and Fun Tion's demonstration, although Luo Fan did not understand the cultivation method of the primordial spirit Great Tao, he had a basic understanding of the characteristics of the primordial spirit Great Tao. The primordial spirit Great Tao was a cultivation method to train one's own soul. It could continuously transform one's soul during the process of cultivation. In the end, it could even allow one's soul to break free from the restrictions of the physical body and become a cultivator's real physical body. It could bear the will and memories of the cultivator, entrust it to the heaven and earth, and obtain the ability to live forever. The final achievement was the primordial spirit. Chapter 116. Gains in 3 years. This is the method I used to attain the Tao, the great way of the primordial spirit. After Fun Tion condensed and landed on the ground, he said to Luo Fan. As he spoke, one of the 9 heads swayed slightly, and tiny flames condensed in the air. In the end, it turned into tens of thousands of complicated words and patterns, which were placed in front of Luo Fan. Luo Fan was startled. He was slightly shocked in his heart, and could not help but reveal a faint smile on his face. He raised his eyes and scanned it slightly. He had already imprinted the tens of thousands of words and patterns into his mind and structs in a second. With a thought, he understood that this cultivation technique was actually the cultivation method of the great way of the primordial spirit. From the most basic beginner level to the peak, Fun Tian could cultivate to the ever-changing great way of the primordial spirit realm. Impressively, Fun Tian had unreservedly displayed the roots of his cultivation in front of Luo Fan. He did not hide anything, nor did he hide anything. His honesty made Luo Fan feel embarrassed, and even more so, a little shocked. What Luo Fan had previously displayed was only an inescapable net technique. Although it looked profound, it could only be considered an ordinary and slightly profound technique. Compared to what Fun Tian had displayed, there was simply no comparison at all. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the difference was like the difference between heaven and earth. In other words, after obtaining the great way of the primordial spirit that Fun Tian had displayed, Luo Fan had gained a huge advantage. This thought flashed past Luo Fan's mind and struck in a second. In the blink of an eye, Luo Fan had once again immersed his mind into the mysteries of the great way of the primordial spirit. After a while, he opened his eyes, which were filled with admiration. This great way of the primordial spirit was different from the great way of the Tao fruit. It bypassed the restrictions of the innate God's physical body, allowing the cultivator to become a great way of the primordial spirit that was entrusted to the heaven and earth. In the end, it would possess supreme might and live as long as the heaven and earth. Just by comprehending this cultivation technique, Luo Fan realized that he had gained some understanding of the great way of the Tao fruit. His understanding of the nameless cultivation technique that he had cultivated had deepened by another level. He could even faintly see the origin of that nameless cultivation technique. This technique is indeed profound. To be able to create this technique, fellow Taoist ability is truly admirable. Luo Fan praised. Fun Tian shook his head again, dispersing the words and patterns that were outlined by the flames in the air. After that, he smiled and said, "I often feel that there are some imperfections in this technique. Today, I am fortunate to meet you, fellow Taoist. I hope that you can give me some pointers." Luo Fan waved his hand and said, "There's no need to give pointers. Our attainments are similar, so we're just exchanging pointers. Although I don't know much about fellow Taoist primordial spirit Tao, I've unknowingly created more than 1,200 methods to form a primordial spirit with the help of Pangu's primordial spirit. Among them, none of them can compare to fellow Taoist primordial spirit Tao, but there are still some profundities. Fellow Taoist can take a look and perhaps be enlightened. More than 1,200 methods to form a primordial spirit. When Fun Tian heard the number, he was shocked. Fun Tian's cultivation technique of the primordial spirit Tao was something that he had used the endless primordial spirit Qi to refine his body for tens of thousands of years. Until one day, when his body had grown to its limit and had not improved at all for thousands of years, he had carefully pondered and comprehended for tens of thousands of years. He had even touched Pangu's primordial spirit and created this cultivation technique. Fun Tian had expended almost all of his blood and sweat to form this cultivation technique, but it could be said to be his proudest creation. Now, he suddenly heard that the fellow Taoist in front of him had actually taken out more than 1,200 of the same cultivation technique. How could he not be shocked? While he was bewildered, Luo Fan had already raised his hand and waved it. In the blink of an eye, specks of spiritual light gushed out from his hand, like specks of stars, and were distributed in the void between the two of them. In an instant, it exploded and absorbed the almost endless primordial spirit Qi in the cave abode, gradually turning into more than 1,200 scrolls. In the end, more than 1,200 methods to form a primordial spirit appeared. Seeing the 1,200 methods to form a primordial spirit, Fun Tian had already forgotten to be shocked. He could not help but put all of his attention into the cultivation techniques in front of him. The foundation of Fun Tian's Tao was the primordial spirit Tao. He was extremely clear about the essence and origin of the primordial spirit. Hence, when he saw the 1,200 over cultivation techniques, he immediately used the most professional and picky eyes to observe them and directly saw through the origin of these cultivation techniques. After this round of observation, he instantly felt as if his horizons had been broadened. Among these many cultivation techniques, every single one of them was far inferior to his primordial spirit Tao. This was needless to say, as Luo Fan had already said it before. However, almost all of the methods to form a primordial spirit were things that he had never thought of before, and even more so, he never thought that he could succeed in doing it. To actually be able to combine the soul and the heavenly spirits and earthly fiends to form a physical primordial spirit. Although the path is much longer, in the end, it can also be entrusted to the void and live forever. This seems to make a lot of sense. First, one must form a nascent soul with the soul, then refine the nascent soul, and finally turn it into a primordial spirit. Although the achievement is slightly lower, it is purer. This is the process of the soul forming a core, and finally, the core shattering to become a god. Fun Tian muttered to himself as he comprehended these cultivation techniques. As he observed and comprehended the 1200 over cultivation techniques, the light in Fun Tian's eyes became brighter and brighter. His expression also continuously flashed with more and more enlightenment. So that's how it is. It turns out that abandoning my physical body to focus on cultivating the primordial spirit is not perfect. After 7 days and 7 nights, Fun Tian finally let out a long sigh. He withdrew himself from the 1200 over methods to form a primordial spirit and let out a long sigh. At this moment, his eyes were even clearer and purer than 7 days ago. It was as though the 1200 over cultivation techniques had completely cleansed his mind and will. During these 7 days, Fun Tian continuously comprehended the 1200 over methods to form a primordial spirit. However, Luo Fan did not stay idle either. In his mind and will, the mantra of the great way of the primordial spirit, as well as the route of circulation, flowed continuously. He pondered over the essence of cultivation revealed within, and then compared it with his nameless skill. From the collision of the two different cultivation systems, he comprehended the root of the great way of the Tao fruit, and, from the most fundamental point of view, increased his understanding of his own cultivation technique. By the time Fun Tian had broken away from the many methods to form a primordial spirit, Luo Fan had also achieved quite a bit. He had a deeper understanding of the origin of the great way of the Tao fruit, which allowed the efficiency of the nameless skill to increase by a tiny amount. Even though it was just a tiny amount of improvement, if it were to be accumulated over an endless period of time, this tiny amount of improvement in the efficiency of cultivation might be able to bring forward the time taken for Luo Fan to achieve eternity by a few yuanhui. Fellow Taoist, you don't have to be discouraged. You and I have just started our journey, and there's still a chance to salvage the situation. Luo Fan smiled faintly. As he spoke, he raised his hand slightly and waved it gently. The 1200 over paintings that had been condensing in the void for 7 days and 7 nights collapsed with a loud bang, turning back into chaotic energy and dissipating in the void. Thank you, fellow Taoist. I understand this point, but I am not discouraged. In these 7 days, I have deduced another level of the great way of the primordial spirit from the 1200 over methods to form a primordial spirit. I hope that fellow Taoist can correct me. Fun Tian bowed towards Luo Fan. As he spoke, one of them shook its head. The flames condensed in the void, gradually forming thousands of complicated words and patterns. Luo Fan took a closer look and could not help but exclaim in admiration. He had previously deduced the cultivation method for the next level of the great way of the primordial spirit. However, the cultivation technique that he deduced was far inferior to the one that Fun Tian had deduced. Reconstructing the innate Tao body, allowing this body to reside in the world, obtaining a supreme divine ability, and evolving this kind of change. This method will definitely be able to flourish in the primordial world in the future. Luo Fan was naturally not stingy with his praise. This is all thanks to you, fellow Taoist. Fun Tian does not dare to take credit. Fun Tian said happily. Luo Fan smiled faintly and waved his hand disapprovingly. In the blink of an eye, Luo Fan had stayed at Fun Tian's place for 3 years. In these 3 years, they had communicated and debated with each other. They had brought out the various experiences they had gained during their cultivation process and discussed and distinguished them. During this process, both Luo Fan and Fantian felt that their knowledge had greatly increased. Although the two of them did not improve much in terms of cultivation, due to the increase in their knowledge, they were able to use their own strength more freely and agilely, causing their strength to increase greatly. Amongst them, the one who had improved the most was, of course, Fantian, who was originally at a lower cultivation level. At the very least, the Fantian 3 years later was no longer the cultivator from 3 years ago, who only had 9 types of application techniques other than the Primordial Spirit Great Tao. In these 3 years, through his discussion with Luo Fan, he had created the 72 methods of the Primordial Spirit. There were a total of 72 extremely powerful application techniques that could be completely compatible with the Primordial Spirit Great Tao, allowing the power of the Primordial Spirit Great Tao to be fully unleashed. Numerically speaking, his strength was 10 times stronger than it was 3 years ago. After his strength had increased greatly, he finally understood how much Luo Fan had given in 3 years ago. Only then did he understand how huge the gap between him and Luo Fan was. Because of this, he was even more grateful to Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan had treated him as an equal when interacting with him, Fantian had directly treated Luo Fan as if he was his own elder brother. His words and actions were extremely respectful. On this day, the two of them finally perfected the restriction refining technique. Fantian suddenly said to Luo Fan, "Fellow Taoist, I have studied it a few times and finally realized that if I want to reverse the mistake of abandoning my physical body when I was forming the Primordial Spirit, I still need to suffer an extremely powerful bombardment of astral fiends and return to my origin during this process. However, I do not know where to find such a powerful astral fiend bombardment. Fellow Taoist, you have seen a lot of time, and you also know the cultivation method of the Primordial Spirit Great Tao. I wonder if you have any recommendations?" Luo Fan pondered for a moment and said, "The astral energy is gathered at the astral wind, thunder, and fire layer above 90,000 miles, while the baleful energy is gathered at the Yellow Springs underground. I am unable to think of a suitable location to trigger such a bombardment of astral fiends at the same time. Fellow Taoist, you have no idea. What should we do?" Fantian was shocked and said, Chapter 117, Heavenly Calamity. Attract the Heavenly Calamity. May I ask, brother, what is the Heavenly Calamity, and how do you attract it? Fantian was slightly stunned and said, "The Heavenly Calamity is a tribulation born from heaven and earth. It is a test of heaven and earth. If you can endure it, you will have a bright future. If you can't, you will die. Sai, this is also the reason why I admire your Primordial Spirit, Great Tao, so much. The Primordial Spirit, Great Tao that you cultivate before becoming a Great Tao Primordial Spirit can be achieved without undergoing any heavenly calamity. In comparison, even if the cultivation of the Tao fruit Great Tao that I cultivate is the smoothest and goes straight to the root, and once it takes form, I'll be able to attain the Tao fruit, but I still need to undergo a heavenly calamity before I can succeed." Luo Fan looked at Fantian with a sigh. "This does not seem to be a good thing. There are many drawbacks, causing me to need to attract the heavenly calamity to temper myself in order to improve. In comparison, your Tao Fire Great Tao is more orthodox." Fantian smiled bitterly and said, "This is just a matter of opinion. As for what the heavenly calamity is, it is impossible to describe with words. You can use this method to attract the heavenly calamity and experience it yourself. I believe that with your ability, there should be no danger to your life." Luo Fan smiled and said. As he spoke, he raised his hand and pointed. A speck of spiritual light directly rushed out from his hand. In the blink of an eye, it absorbed the primal chaos chi in midair and condensed into a technique that was written on the scroll. When this technique appeared, waves of heavenly calamity, chi faintly condensed in the air and bombarded the scroll. However, Luo Fan's divine ability was mysterious. Although this scroll was formed from the primal chaos chi that contained his memories and did not contain any mysterious technique, it was still not that easy to break. All sorts of baleful aura bombarded it, but it only stirred up some ripples on the scroll, as if it was tempering the scroll. It actually attracted the natural rejection of heaven and earth. This technique is indeed mysterious. Fantion knew what was going on the moment he saw it, and cried out in shock. As he spoke, he did not dare to be negligent, and instantly recorded the hundreds of words of the technique in his mind. With a thought, he had already analyzed the spell clearly. This method is quite sinister. After analyzing it clearly, he couldn't help but hesitate. It was true that this technique could draw upon the baleful energy of heaven and earth to create its own tribulations. However, this technique could not control the power of the tribulations. The magnitude of the tribulations triggered depended purely on the cultivation level of the cultivator using the technique. The higher the cultivation level, the stronger the power. The lower the cultivation level, the weaker the power. Fellow Taoist, your primordial spirit can transform into an 80,000-kilometer mountain of flames. Although it's extremely powerful, it's not condensed. If it's not the astral fiend, heavenly tribulation of extreme strength, it won't be able to refine your primordial spirit, turning it from illusory to real and achieving a connate Tao body. The choice is up to you, fellow Taoist. Luo Fan smiled. Hearing that, Fantion's face turned cold. He made his decision in the blink of an eye. After nodding to Luo Fan, he swung his small head, and a 30-feet-tall black curtain appeared in the air. Abruptly, it split to two sides, revealing a medium-sized door. What he saw through the door was the scene of the primordial world. Luo Fan smiled. He could already feel Fantion's determination. With a step, he left the cave abode and floated in the sky, thousands of kilometers above the blazing mountain. Below, the 80,000-kilometer mountain of flames formed by Fantion's primordial spirit started to fluctuate violently and gradually changed its form. Not long later, it turned into a 9-headed flaming lion that was close to 10,000 kilometers tall, standing on top of the Yellow Springs 4,900 kilometers underground. However, its body that was exposed above the ground was also close to the height of Luo Fan. To be able to refine such a primordial spirit, how much primal chaos chi must have been absorbed all these years? When Luo Fan saw this huge creature, he could not help but sigh in his heart. Roar! After the 9-headed lion appeared, its 9 heads raised to the sky and let out a loud roar. This roar seemed to come out from his 9 mouths and spread out in all directions, causing the void to tremble. The clouds within a radius of hundreds of thousands of kilometers in the sky were scattered, turning into water vapor and vitality. The ground was also shaken by the sound, causing ripples that could be seen with the naked eye to spread out in all directions. This had truly reached the point where it could shake the world. Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and an invisible force field appeared around his body, isolating him from the vibrations of the sound. Following that, he took a step forward and arrived at a high altitude that was 1,000,000 kilometers away from his place. He summoned a cloud and supported his body. Looking into the distance, he could clearly see an astonishingly huge 9-headed flaming lion that was emitting waves of mighty aura roaring towards the sky. The roar reached 1,000,000 kilometers away from where Luo Fan was, but it was still shocking and had a huge impact. Suddenly, countless long and huge fire dragons flashed across the 9-headed flaming lion's body. After these fire dragons appeared, they quickly shuttled through the void. In the blink of an eye, they formed a huge 3-dimensional talisman that was shaped like a Buzhou mountain around the 9-headed flaming lion's body. After this 3-dimensional talisman appeared, it produced an extremely mysterious and terrifying suction force. Even Luo Fan, who was 1,000,000 kilometers away, could feel the existence of this suction force. With the appearance of the suction force, the layer of wind, lightning, and fire above 90,000 miles seemed to be pulled by a tremendous force. With the nine-headed lion as the center, a huge whirlpool appeared within a radius of 1,000,000 miles, causing endless wind, lightning, and fire to continuously gather towards the whirlpool. Gradually, a huge, colorful cloud was formed above the nine-headed lion, covering the sky and the sun. At the same time, the ground surged, and a faint black fog spread out from the cave, filling up the deep pit that had been melted by the flaming mountain. It gradually spread out, covering 1,000,000 kilometers, corresponding to the huge cloud above. Following that, an extremely terrifying force was naturally formed in the void. Under this huge force, the nine-headed flaming lion slowly floated up, standing 5,000 kilometers above in the sky. It was sandwiched between the astral wind, lightning, and fire above, and the fiend of the earth below. This scene was so grand that it was enough to make people's hearts tremble. Even though he was 1,000,000 kilometers away, Luo Fan could still feel the brilliant heavenly might that was being emitted from it. To actually be able to attract such a huge heavenly tribulation, Fun Tian is indeed blessed by the heavens. I believe that he must have had an extremely rare opportunity and fortuitous encounter before. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. At this moment, the three-dimensional talisman that had condensed outside of Fun Tian's Yuan Shun had already collapsed, turning into source energy that charged into the astral wind, lightning, and fire above and the earth fiend below. This was the first time Luo Fan had seen the effect of this technique that could attract the might of the heavens to form a heavenly tribulation ever since he had created it. He was rather shocked in his heart. This technique is extremely effective when used to perish together. Such a thought suddenly appeared in his mind. The effect of this technique was extremely mysterious and profound, but in reality, it was not very difficult to create. Now, it was the beginning of the world, and the primitive world was in the process of evolving. The various laws of the world and the various operating rules had not been completely formed. The heavenly tribulation was naturally the same. Luo Fan himself had experienced the heavenly tribulation once, and had seen Hong Jun go through the tribulation 9 times. He had even seen Guang Pu go through the tribulation once. However, unknowingly, he had seen a trace of the mysteries of the operation of the heavenly tribulation, and turned it into a Tao technique, becoming this technique that could attract the might of the heavens. Luo Fan's mind moved slightly. He raised his hand and waved. 81 units of magical power left his body, instantly setting up a large formation that concealed his aura around him. At this moment, the astral wind in the sky and earth suddenly pressed towards the center. Pitter-patter, rumble, 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 ka-cha, shio, 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 all sorts of strange sounds suddenly rang out, spreading far and wide in all directions. In an instant, it was as if a huge hole had been broken in the sky, creating a huge funnel. It extended from the astral wind, lightning, and fire layer that was 45,000 kilometers above to where the nine-headed flaming lion was. A huge hole also seemed to have been broken open in the ground. Endless black gas sprayed out like a fountain, quickly rushing towards the nine-headed flaming lion. Fun Tian did not hesitate in the slightest between the two terrifying forces. There was only determination and determination in his eyes. Seeing that the two forces were added to his body, he suddenly let out a loud roar. His body shook violently, stretching to its limit, and exploded with an aura that could suppress the heaven and earth. In an instant, he was drowned by the boundless astral wind. After being drowned, cries of pain could be heard from the place where the astral wind met, shaking the heaven and earth. If Luo Fan wanted to see Fun Tian's response, he would naturally be able to do so easily. However, he did not do so. He only raised his hand and waved it lightly, causing the primal chaos energy to continuously condense in the air, causing the auspicious cloud beneath his feet to become more and more condensed, becoming bigger and bigger. When the auspicious cloud had grown to a radius of 3 meters, he immediately laid down. With a wave of his hand, the fine wine that he had casually brewed over the past few years appeared in his hand. He took a sip and looked at the terrifying and grand astral fiend heavenly tribulation that was millions of kilometers away in satisfaction. The astral wind, lightning, fire, and earth fiends intersected, erupting with an incomparably terrifying destructive power. Although the space of the great wasteland world was extremely stable and did not produce any small spatial cracks, if the astral fiend heavenly tribulation were to occur in Luo Fan's lesser kiliocosm, or even in a medium kiliocosm that he might have created, it would be enough to completely destroy these two worlds, causing the lesser kiliocosm and the medium kiliocosm to explode and eventually return to primal chaos. The astral fiend heavenly tribulation lasted for 9 days and 9 nights. During this process, endless loud sounds filled the heavens and the earth. The location of the heavenly tribulation, which was also the location of the 9-headed flaming lion Fention, was even more chaotic. All sorts of astral fiends that were incomparably explosive filled every inch of space within 1,000,000 kilometers. All sorts of colors interweaved together, forming a scene that looked like paste. The surging and chaotic scene emitted an incomparably dangerous aura, warning all living beings in the world. The might of the heavens could not be blasphemed. It's already been 9 days and 9 nights. Whether or not I can survive the astral fiend heavenly tribulation and successfully condense the innate Tao body would depend on today. At this moment, Luo Fan had already sat up and kept the fine wine that he had drunk for 9 days into the universe within his sleeve. He frowned slightly as he looked at the scene of the astral fiend heavenly tribulation in the distance. 9 was the extreme number. The heavenly tribulation was unleashed by the brilliant might of the heavens. Naturally, it matched this number, but it would definitely not exceed this number because of any influence. Chapter 118. Division of 2 realms. After half a day, there was a huge change in the chaotic scene of the heavenly tribulation. All of a sudden, it was as if there were a few gigantic arms twisting and twisting within the chaotic scene of the tribulation. The baleful aura, which was already extremely chaotic and explosive, suddenly churned violently and even gradually formed the shape of a vortex. Luo Fan waved his hand lightly, and the infinite void palace turned into a purplish-yellow light that condensed and changed in front of him. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a huge mirror with a diameter of 100 feet. Then, 2 rays of golden light that shone on the source were emitted from Luo Fan's eyes and covered the mirror. As the golden light shone, the huge mirror that originally only reflected Luo Fan's figure gradually changed and showed the scene of the demonic chi being drowned by the astral wind, thunder fire, and demonic chi. There was a middle-aged man who was 100 feet tall. He was naked, and his body was slender. His muscles were bulging, and he looked extremely strong. Standing in the void, under the reflection of the demonic chi that was twisting around him, he looked extremely mighty, as if a deity from the 9 heavens had suddenly fallen into the mortal world. It's finally done. When Luo Fan saw this, he could not help but let out a long breath. Although he knew that with Fention's cultivation level, passing the demonic chi heavenly tribulation would not be a problem, but there could still be accidents. Before the results were out, he naturally did not dare to relax. Although this person was 100 feet tall and seemed to be very different from Luo Fan's innate Taoist physique, it was still a true, complete innate Taoist physique. One must know that when the world was first created, Panga's body was so huge that it could support the heavens and the earth. Compared to him, this body that was 100 feet tall was nothing. Break! After the middle-aged man appeared, he suddenly let out a loud roar. This voice was exactly the voice of the 9-headed lion Fention from before. Following this roar, the middle-aged man raised both of his hands up high. In an instant, in the void, countless dark red flames appeared out of nowhere. As if covering the sky and the earth, they occupied every inch of space within a 10,000-mile radius. These flames were extremely strange, as if they were alive. They mixed together with the boundless, baleful aura, yet they did not mix with each other. They seemed to be exceptionally independent, and one could even see that they were devouring the baleful aura to strengthen themselves. Then, the burly man's hands suddenly tore in two directions. That action seemed to be tearing a real substance apart. Along with his movements, the living flames that filled the area within a radius of 10,000 kilometers suddenly erupted with an unimaginably great power, forming strong and obvious shock waves in both directions. The astral baleful chi that had already been violently twisted was instantly expelled in two directions by the flame shockwave, causing an increasingly large vacuum to appear around the brawny man's body. This power was like a domino, the range of its influence growing larger and larger, the effects growing stronger and stronger. Gradually, it affected an area of 1,000,000 miles, causing a huge change to occur in the entire area of the astral fiend heavenly tribulation. Within the range of the astral fiend heavenly tribulation, the astral wind, thunder, fire, and earth fiends gradually separated. Most of the astral wind, thunder, and fire retreated back into the layer of astral wind, thunder, and fire. They gradually split into 9 layers, condensing in the layers of astral wind, thunder, and fire at different heights. Most of the earth fiends also retreated underground at the same time. In the blink of an eye, they went past the yellow springs, and no one knew where they were underground. However, the remaining small portion of the baleful aura merged together, forming an extremely special kind of energy. It spread in all directions towards the primordial world and gradually hid in the void, disappearing without a trace. Not long later, the chaotic scene of the tribulation transcendence completely disappeared. Only a brawny, middle-aged man, who was about 1,000 feet tall, was enveloped by flames that covered a radius of 10,000 kilometers. He floated in the void, giving off a peerlessly mighty aura. The great path of the primordial soul has changed, and the connate Taoism body has been formed. Once it takes form, it will become an immortal body. The brawny man suddenly spoke these words that contained a strange rhythm. Then, the dark red flames that occupied a radius of 10,000 kilometers rapidly shrank, surging towards the brawny man's body at an unimaginable speed. Like a river flowing into the sea, it sank straight into him. The scene was extremely grand and shocking. After a short while, the flames, which were countless times larger than the brawny man's body, drilled into his body without leaving a single drop behind. After collecting so many flames, the brawny man's face revealed a joyful expression. He raised his hand and waved gently. The strange energy that had originally scattered in the void, which was formed by the fusion of the astral wind, lightning, fire, and earth fiends, continuously reappeared and gathered towards his body. In the blink of an eye, a fiery red robe condensed around his body. After obtaining the robe, the peerlessly mighty aura on his body had an additional mysterious intent in the blink of an eye. Looking at Fentian, whose appearance had changed greatly, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly. His 8 feet tall body suddenly expanded, and in an instant he had already reached a height of 1,000 feet, which was the same height as Fentian's body. Then he waved his hand again, and the mirror that was formed by the purplish-yellow light in front of him instantly collapsed, turning back into a purplish-yellow light, which wrapped around his body. With another dash, he brought his body in front of Fentian, who was millions of miles away. Congratulations on completing your cultivation and obtaining the innate Tao body. Luo Fan stood in the void, smiled, and said respectfully, "This is all thanks to you. If not for your bestowment, I don't know when I would have been able to return to the right path." Fentian hurriedly bowed and thanked him. "You're too polite, fellow cultivator. We're on the same path. There's no need to thank each other." Luo Fan only smiled. At this time, the astral wind, lightning, and fire layer above the 9th heaven had yet to completely stabilize. The balance of the 9 levels that had been broken by the astral fiend heavenly tribulation had yet to be restored. This caused the sky above a radius of millions of miles to still be different from the rest of the sky. Multicolored and strange lights were like a strange painting. Under the illumination of the sun and the moon, it seemed extremely mysterious, as though the world had produced a strange phenomenon due to Fintion's success in transcending the tribulation. After I passed through this tribulation, I have gained a lot of enlightenment. Today, I have a technique, and I hope that you can correct me. Naturally, there was no point in continuing to express his gratitude verbally. Fintion remembered the gratitude in his heart and changed the topic. Oh, the technique that was comprehended during the heavenly tribulation must be extremely profound. I wonder what kind of technique it is. Luo Fan was naturally interested when he heard that. Fellow Taoist, please take a look. Fintion pointed downwards. Luo Fan followed his finger and looked down, only to discover that countless complicated and profound runes that were condensed from countless crimson flames had suddenly appeared on top of the huge pit below. These runes were like silk, densely packed, and covered every part of the deep pit, not letting a single speck of dust leak out. Following that, these runes shook and a fiery red light flashed. After the light flashed, the deep pit actually disappeared without a trace. At the original location of the 80,000-kilometer flaming mountain, which was also the power of the 4,900-kilometer deep pit, right below Luo Fan and Fintion, had already turned into a slightly undulating mountainous terrain. There was not a single trace of it being filled up, as though it had been like this since ancient times, and the deep pit from before had never appeared. It's actually splitting space. Fellow Taoist, this technique is extremely extraordinary. When Luo Fan saw this change, he was shocked. With his knowledge, he could tell with a glance that the deep pit was not filled up, nor was it covered up by a technique like a camouflage technique. Instead, it had completely disappeared. The location of the deep pit had been separated from the primordial world in that instant. At this moment, what filled the area below them was the ground that was originally around the deep pit. There was no need to mention the stability of the primordial world. Now, that Fintion was actually able to split space from the primordial world so easily, this kind of remarkable power was already beyond what Luo Fan could imagine. Could it be that Fintion's cultivation realm had actually risen to such a level after going through the hellish calamity? Not exactly. Fintion shook his head and sighed. As he spoke, he raised his hand and waved. Specks of crimson flames gathered in front of him, forming thousands of words and dozens of images. It was a technique that contained countless mysteries. Luo Fan's eyes flickered with the light of contemplation as he carefully looked at the technique in front of him. After a long time, he let out a long breath. He was a little disappointed, but also understood. This technique was indeed a technique that could split space. However, before this technique could be used, it required a long period of preparation. He needed to let his own aura permeate the space that he wanted to split. In other words, he needed to use his own strength to fill the space for a very long period of time, so that the space would be unknowingly tainted with his strength and aura. Although it was mysterious, Luo Fan was able to do it now. However, it was not because Fintion's cultivation had really risen to the point where he could casually split the primordial world. Although there are some flaws, it is still an extremely mysterious technique. Furthermore, it seems to have many applications. If it is modified, it might become a powerful attack technique. We can also study this in the future. I wonder, where did you split the space? Luo Fan muttered. However, it has fused with the cave abode. Fellow Taoist, please take a look. Fintion smiled and said. As he spoke, he raised his hand and waved. A 300 meters tall black light screen appeared in front of the two of them. Then it suddenly split open from the middle. In the blink of an eye, a door appeared. When Luo Fan saw it, he could not help but praise Fintion's creativity. It turned out that the cave abode behind the door had already changed its appearance. The original cave abode had turned into a floating island, floating in the endless void formed by the deep pit. It could move at any time, floating in the air, revealing an elegant and free aura. Around the floating island, There were dense clouds and mist, as if it was a fairyland. With a step, the two of them arrived on the floating island. Although his body was 100 times larger than before, the cave abode had a mysterious function. When the two of them stepped into it, it felt exactly the same as before. Just as he sat down and was about to study Fan Tian's improvement after transcending the tribulation and what kind of power he had, Luo Fan suddenly felt a rush of blood. With a thought, the mental cultivation method of the yin-yang calculation method flowed through his mind. With a wave of his right hand, Luo Fan's face revealed a hint of joy and said, "I didn't expect such a surprise to appear, but I need to go and take care of it. I'm afraid I'll have to visit again in the future when I have time." Hearing that, Fan Tian did not stop him. He nodded and said, "Since fellow Taoist has something to do, you can go ahead. I just happen to be stabilizing my realm, so you don't have to worry about it." Luo Fan smiled embarrassedly. He raised his hand and pointed, causing a bit of spiritual light to rush out and arrive in front of Fan Tian, hovering there. Fan Tian and Luo Fan had been together for 3 years, but he had already developed a tacit understanding with Luo Fan. The moment he saw the spiritual light, he immediately understood Luo Fan's intentions. He immediately waved his hand and received the spiritual light that Luo Fan had sent over, fusing it into the space between his eyebrows. That bit of spiritual light was a piece of memory, recording the location of the Seeker Cave. Chapter 119. Extreme, cold, heavenly fiend, thunder, tribulation. Luo Fan's sudden inspiration ability was the ability that came after attaining the Tao fruit, the great breakthrough in cultivation realm. This ability was extremely mysterious, but it allowed him to borrow the mysterious mechanism in the unseen world to sense the changes that were closely related to him, and also the changes that he was concerned about. These changes could appear in different spaces. They could appear in the future, or they could appear billions of miles away, far beyond the range of his perception. It was mysterious and wonderful beyond words. If he had a sudden impulse as a guide, using the yin-yang test method to deduce the cause and effect would become a piece of cake. Therefore, with just a slight calculation, Luo Fan completely knew what had triggered his sudden inspiration. "It only took me 50 years to make a breakthrough. What a rare surprise." Countless thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Wrapped up by the purple-yellow light transformed from the Wuji Palace, Jihao's speed had reached an unimaginable level. While moving forward, he left thousands of miles long afterimages in the air. The result of his divination was that his only female disciple and chief son had made a breakthrough. More than 50 years ago, Guangpu received Luo Fan's recognition after going through 12 trials. She was accepted as a disciple by Luo Fan in the Seeker's Cave on Buzhou Mountain. At that time, Luo Fan had told her to take Luo Fu to a place 360 million miles away from Buzhou Mountain to find a chaos spirit root, so that she could merge it with her body and obtain its super powerful power. Now, after more than 50 years of hard work, although Guangpu and Luo Fu had not reached the location pointed out by Luo Fan, they had already achieved the effect of training and had even surpassed Luo Fan's expectations. Guangpu had actually understood her own Tao and triggered the heaven's calamity. Just like Hong Jun, her body had started to transform into power. At the same time, Luo Fu had improved after more than 50 years of training. After being affected by the heaven's calamity triggered by Guangpu, his Yuan Dan showed signs of breaking. That was a sign that the god of fire was about to ignite. At this time, Guangpu and Luo Fu were 230 million miles away from Buzhou Mountain. They were 130 million miles away from the location pointed out by Luo Fan. Fan Tian's cave was only 130 million miles away from Buzhou Mountain, which was much closer than Guangpu and Luo Fu's location. However, as Luo Fan and the two of them were heading in different directions, Guangpu and Luo Fu did not pass by Fan Tian's cave. Luo Fan made use of the Limitless Void Palace's super speed and continuously headed in the direction that Ji Fong Boy had sensed. After 3 days and 3 nights, He had traveled nearly 200 million miles and arrived at the location where Guangpu and Luofu were. It was a valley that was neither too big nor too small. It was a valley that had a circumference of 300 miles, and there were dozens of mountains of different heights surrounding it. The valley was filled with vitality, and it was full of life. The flowers, grass, and trees were extremely lush. In the depths of the valley, there was a source of chaos vitality, which was constantly emitting thin chaos vitality. Luo Fan thought about it and recalled the valley from the Pai Xiu's memory. He had been to this valley once before. Or perhaps it should be said that he was a Pai Xiu. He had been here once. Back then, the newly born Pai Xiu was muddle-headed and unconsciously wandered around the chaotic land. It only knew how to find a comfortable place to stay, which was also a place with a source of chaos vitality. The source of chaos vitality was where he had stayed for a few years. The reason why he left was because there was an innate god residing in the depths of the valley where the source of chaos vitality was. Although the innate god was also muddle-headed, he was born stronger than the Pai Xiu, and he had the instinct to absorb the chaotic qi for cultivation. He knew how to absorb the chaotic qi to strengthen himself, which made the Pai Xiu not a match for him at all. Hence, after being discovered by him for a few years, the Pai Xiu had no choice but to leave. With a thought, Luo Fan found Jifeng Boy, who was hiding in the void. With this thought, his eyes suddenly flashed, and a boy with an indifferent expression on his face appeared in front of him. This was the treasure spirit of the Jifeng seal, Jifeng Boy. After appearing, Jifeng Boy just bowed and said, "Greetings, master." He didn't say anything else. "Well done," Luo Fan praised. He didn't expect Jifeng Boy's answer, so he raised his hand and pointed between the boy's eyebrows. In an instant, Jifeng Boy's memories of the past 50 years flashed through his mind like a movie. In the blink of an eye, he clearly knew all the experiences of Guangpu and Luo Fu in the past 50 years, almost without leaving anything out. It can be regarded as a legend. After seeing their experiences clearly, Luo Fan couldn't help but praise. Now, this valley was the territory of the 11th innate god that Guangpu and Luo Fu had passed through. At this time, it had been more than 100,000 years since the Pai Xiu had passed through here. During these years, the changes in the untainted land had been the fastest. Compared with the time when the Pai Xiu had passed through, several of those muddle-headed innate gods had opened their spiritual apertures. Some of them caused a lot of trouble for Guangpu and Luo Fu, but some also brought them a lot of benefits. But now, the innate god occupying the valley had brought them a lot of trouble. After hundreds of thousands of years of cultivation, this innate god had opened his spiritual aperture a long time ago. Moreover, the degree of completeness of his soul sense was no less than that of Guangpu. And this was also the source of trouble for Guangpu and Luo Fu, and also the opportunity for Guangpu to trigger the heavenly tribulation. There was nothing special about the reason. As an innate god who had long known how to cultivate, after hundreds of thousands of years of continuous cultivation, the power he had accumulated had reached a very terrifying level. Although, because of the simple cultivation method, there was not much improvement in his cultivation realm. It was enough to make Guangpu and Luo Fu have no ability to resist him. Most of the innate gods did not understand human feelings, did not know morality, and simply respected the strong. This innate god happened to be one of them. For Guangpu, who was countless times weaker than him, to have a mysterious cultivation method that even he could not imagine, this innate god, who did not understand human feelings, did not know morality, and respected the strong, of course, would not let go of her, let alone ask for it politely. The moment he knew that Guangpu had a mysterious cultivation method, he directly launched an attack and wanted to snatch the cultivation method. After a very difficult and bitter fight, Guangpu was enlightened, realized the source of her magic power, and triggered the Tai Yin freezing heavenly tribulation. The brilliant heaven's power produced by the formation of the heavenly tribulation made this innate god timid. So he gave up attacking and hid underground to spy on Guangpu's heavenly tribulation. planning to find another opportunity to seize the cultivation method. I didn't expect that such a simple cultivation method could also be used to cultivate such a strong power, but it's a pity that you don't understand the great way and don't know good or bad. You dare to treat my disciple like this. I can't let you live. Luo Fan sighed secretly, and in the blink of an eye, he had already determined the tragic fate of this innate god. He understood this innate god's pursuit of mysterious cultivation methods, and even if he were to encounter such a situation, he would probably make the same choice as this innate god. However, this did not mean that he would let him go because of this understanding. Luo Fan was quite protective of his own people. At this time, the Taiyin freezing heavenly tribulation that Guangpu had triggered had already come to an end. However, Luo Fu was a few miles away from the heavenly tribulation, riding on the white tiger and watching with a worried face. He was so concerned that his primordial core had already started to crack, and there were some blue sparks coming out from it, but he did not care at all. Seeing this, Luo Fan could not help but frown. This kind of concern is more than that of a normal senior brother and junior sister. Could it be that the two of them? Such a thought flashed across his mind, but in the blink of an eye, he could not help but laugh. No matter whether there was an ambiguous relationship between the two of them, to him, it was something that he was happy to see happen, so he naturally did not care about it. With a slight thought, Jifeng Boy bowed slightly, turned into a palm-sized seal, rushing into the world of Luo Fan's sea of consciousness. With another turn, it turned into a huge seal that was tens of thousands of feet tall and stood beside the Buzhou mountain that was formed by his spirit, making it seem to have become a little more stable. After taking another look at the inside of the valley, Luo Fan knew that the Taiyin freezing heavenly tribulation that Guangpu was undergoing would only end in 6 hours. With a thought, he took a step forward and arrived at the source of chaotic vitality in the depths of the valley. This source of chaotic vitality had been continuously absorbed for tens of thousands of years, but compared to the time when Pai Xiu had seen it before, it was more than 1,000 times smaller. This made Luo Fan very emotional. Although he dared to look, he did not stop at all. The purplish-yellow light that was formed by the Void Wuji Palace flashed, and he had already drilled into the ground with it. In the blink of an eye, they had already arrived at a sphere with a diameter of tens of thousands of feet, more than 300 miles underground. "What is that?" A shout suddenly burst out from inside the sphere. Then, a burst of killing intent rushed towards Luo Fan. Along with this killing intent, there was also an overwhelming amount of chaotic vitality. The wind blew violently, and the power surged, creating a strange scene as if the end of the world had arrived. Luo Fan was not moved at all. He raised his hand and waved lightly, and all the explosive changes in the entire sphere with a diameter of tens of thousands of feet completely calmed down. The overwhelming amount of chaotic vitality was also instantly frozen. I didn't expect to see such a scene again after tens of thousands of years. Luo Fan looked down at a monster that had the head of a tiger, the body of a leopard, and the spine of 1,000 feet tall, and there were sharp bone spurs growing from head to tail. He sighed and said, "What are you? What have you done?" The monster roared at the sky, and there was a strong sense of fear in its eyes. Luo Fan knew that this innate god did not remember him, and he was too lazy to talk nonsense. He said, "For the sake of being an old friend, I will not kill you, but only seal you." Then he raised his hand and waved. In the void, dozens of complicated and mysterious three-dimensional talismans suddenly appeared, and they combined together to form a huge light shield, wrapping the ferocious-looking innate god in it. Then, an indescribable suction was produced, and these dozens of three-dimensional talismans madly absorbed all the energy within the 10,000 feet of the sky. All the chaotic vitality that the innate god had emitted before was sucked into the talismans and turned into the power of the talismans. Suddenly, the talismans shrank, and the innate god screamed, turned into a palm-sized sculpture. Chapter 120. Moon's Secret Formula 1. It seemed that in the blink of an eye, Luo Fan had completely sealed the innate god, who could make Guang Pu and Luo Fu unable to resist and could only survive under the heaven's punishment, and refined it into a statue. Luo Fan raised his hand and shook it. The statue had already entered the sleeve universe. The sealing technique he used was not a new technique. It was the inescapable net technique that he used to seal the sky-burning primordial spirit. However, this time, he completely activated the power of this technique. The statue that was sealed by this technique could also be treated as a celestial device. As long as he refined it, he could summon the innate god with a tiger's head and a leopard's body to do things for him or even fight for him. Scanning the spherical airspace with a diameter of 10,000 feet, Luo Fan saw every inch of the dark spherical airspace with a glance. After discovering that there was nothing else worthy of his attention, Luo Fan's mind moved. The purplish-yellow light of the limitless void palace wrapped around his body and rushed upwards. It was as if he was flying through the void. After a while, he rushed out of the ground and arrived at the location of the chaotic Yuan-Chi source. The source of chaotic vitality was at the end of a cave in the depths of the valley. The cave was not very deep, but it was still 100,000 feet long. The width of the depths was similar to the airspace hundreds of miles below. There was also an airspace with a diameter of 10,000 feet. Obviously, the innate god with a tiger's head and a leopard's body usually stayed here. He took a step, and his body crossed a distance of 10,000 feet. In an instant, he came out of the cave. Hidden in the void 10,000 zhang above the ground, he calmly looked at Guang Pu, who was struggling bitterly under the extreme, chill heavenly lightning tribulation, trying his best to resist the attacks of the heavenly lightning and earthly fire. Sure enough, he has improved a lot. Although his talent is not as good as Hongjuan's, it is still amazing. Luo Fan looked at the way Guang Pu blocked the thunder tribulation and felt a faint joy in his heart. Compared to the last time Luo Fan saw Guang Pu's usage of magic arts and divine abilities was many times more exquisite. Even if she was at the same cultivation base as when she left Buzhou Mountain, she could still unleash hundreds of times more power. Moreover, her cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds. It had at least doubled, so the strength she could display now was like the difference between heaven and earth. Although it still couldn't be compared to Hongjun, who attracted the heavenly tribulation, it wasn't much different. Luo Fan watched Guang Pu struggle. Unknowingly, 6 hours had passed. Just as Luo Fan had estimated, at the last moment of the 6 hours, the extreme cold heaven fiend thunder tribulation suddenly condensed its endless power, completely condensing the silver-white tribulation cloud in the sky into one, transforming into a silver lightning bolt that was larger than any of the previous tribulation lightning bolts. It was like a pillar of the heavens, emitting an awe-inspiring heavenly might, suppressing the depths of the soul of any spiritual sense in this valley. With the appearance of the lightning, the temperature of the whole valley dropped by hundreds of degrees. It caused ice crystals to condense in the void, making the valley seem extremely mysterious and magical. However, it was also extremely dangerous. Under Luo Fu's horrified gaze and under Guang Pu's gaze, which was filled with endless understanding, this magical bolt of lightning came crashing down towards Guang Pu. Guang Pu had endured the bombardment of the thunder punishment for 5 days and 5 nights. Although she had almost used up all her power, her willpower had been tempered by the thunder punishment to the point that it was as tough as steel. Looking at the silver lightning that was formed by the tribulation clouds and descending from the sky like a pillar in the sky, there was not a hint of wavering in her eyes, nor did she retreat. She let out a soft cry. She roused the little power left in her body, but it had already undergone some kind of mysterious change. She raised her jade-like hand and suddenly slapped upwards. Then, countless three-dimensional talismans in the shape of heavenly wood giant tree rushed out from her palm. Each and every one of them seemed illusory and real. As soon as they appeared, they frantically tore apart all the energy in the void, transforming it into the power of the three-dimensional talismans themselves. They constantly transformed these three-dimensional talismans from their original illusory and real forms into absolute reality. In the blink of an eye, there were 129,600 three-dimensional talismans rushing out of her palm. They covered the sky and the earth, drowning the huge silver-white lightning that was descending from the sky. At this moment, Guang Pu's whole body trembled slightly. Her face instantly turned pale, and her eyes became indifferent, as if she had a clear conscience. Luo Fan took a slight look and knew that she had put all her power into this final attack. If this attack was unable to resist the lightning, what awaited her was only death, her soul dispersing. You're very decisive. I just don't know what kind of magical power unit you've condensed. Luo Fan smiled slightly, secretly looking forward to it. With his vision, he could naturally see what the result of her final attack would be, so he was not worried at all. In fact, Luo Fan did not come here at this time to sightsee. He came here to see the changes in Guang Pu's energy after going through this tribulation. His goal was to observe the changes in the energy in her body and speculate what kind of form the magical power unit would take when she finally attained the fruit of Tao. Then, according to the final form, he would create a suitable cultivation method like the Creation Jade Archive technique for Guang Pu to cultivate. If not, there would be no need to worry about this place with the protection of Jifeng Boy. Why would there be a need for Luo Fan to come here? Crack, crack, crack. The 129,600 three-dimensional talismans collided with the lightning, and an extremely powerful explosion suddenly broke out. The void seemed to be shaken by the explosion, and the whole valley was lifted up by the shock wave produced by the explosion in the blink of an eye. The yuan qi that was stirred up by the explosion was like countless sharp blades, cutting everything within the range of the valley. To Luo Fan, this little bit of yuan qi impact was naturally nothing. He did not even need to think, and just relied on his body's instincts to eliminate the yuan qi impact that was attacking him. But to Luo Fu, it was not so simple. Luo Fu was only in the Dan formation realm. His body was weak, and his rel was low. How could he withstand such an explosive yuan qi impact? If it was not for the white tiger-shaped magical tool that he was sitting on, which had been refined to the point that it had a little spiritual nature and could protect him the moment the yuan qi hit him, perhaps Luo Fu would have been shattered by this impact. Junior sister, you have to hold on. Luo Fu did not care about himself and let out a loud roar. The concern contained in his voice was so obvious that it was almost tangible. However, his cultivation level was limited. The voice was destroyed by the yuan qi impact after it traveled dozens of feet. It could not reach Guang Pu at all, even if the two of them deny it with all their might. I don't believe that there is no ambiguity between them. Luo Fan glanced at Luo Fu and smiled. He was happy to see the ambiguity between Guang Pu and Luo Fu. He had been in the primordial world for more than a yuan hui period. Other than cultivating, he rarely saw anyone. The ambiguity between Luo Fu and Guang Pu made him feel rather close. Besides, although Luo Fu looked like a 12-year-old boy, his true age was already a yuan hui period. It was not considered puppy love, while Luo Fan was speculating about the relationship between the two of them. The extreme, cold, heavenly fiend, lightning tribulation had already passed. Although the silver bolt of lightning that was like a heavenly pillar was extremely powerful and had the ability to break through the ground tens of kilometers thick. However, the 129,600 three-dimensional talismans were not to be trifled with. These three-dimensional talismans were very mysterious. They could quickly absorb the endless yuan qi around them and absorb the energy emitted by the lightning tribulation to continuously strengthen themselves. Under the continuous resistance, although the bolt of lightning could continuously shatter them, it was also constantly weakened at the same time. When all the three-dimensional talismans were destroyed and finally blasted onto Guang Pu's body, this bolt of lightning had already shrunk by tens of thousands of times. Becoming not much bigger than a thumb. When it landed on Guang Pu's body, it only caused her entire body to be charred black, making her look a little pathetic, but it was unable to cause any real fatal injuries. After a while, the surging yuan qi gradually calmed down. The valley also gradually regained its calm. However, compared to before, this valley had already undergone a huge change. It could almost be said to be an earth-shattering change. The entire valley had already been reduced to ruins. Other than a few stubborn grasses where Luo Fu stood, the other places had been completely crushed, turning into dust that spread out in a radial pattern and covered the entire valley. Luo Fu did not even care about the changes to his inner core. Seeing that the lightning tribulation had calmed down, he naturally focused all his attention on Guang Pu. When he saw Guang Pu's pathetic state, his eyes could not help but turn red. Junior sister. He let out a shrill cry of pain as he controlled the ever-changing magical artifact to rush towards Guang Pu. What a silly boy. He's even lost the basic ability to distinguish. Looks like he'll be a henpecked husband in the future. Luo Fan sighed inwardly. He raised his hand and waved it lightly. An invisible force deterred Luo Fu, preventing him from getting close to Guang Pu so as to not disturb her ongoing transformation. In reality, Guang Pu looked pathetic at this moment, but inside her body, the most important transformation of her life was happening. During this transformation, her entire mind and consciousness were in a mysterious and indescribable state of selflessness. Everything that was happening in the outside world was like a different world to her. Every bit of it flowed through her mind and consciousness, but it could not attract the slightest bit of her attention. The chaotic yuan qi that flowed out from the depths of the valley, the energy that dissipated after the extreme, absolute, chill, heavenly lightning tribulation was shattered. The energy from the 129,600 three-dimensional talismans that she had released earlier, and so on and so forth. Under her control, it continuously gathered towards her body and directly poured into her meridians. Then, it was continuously scattered, purified, condensed, and transformed. Gradually, it formed strands of mysterious energy threads that twisted and changed continuously. It seemed as if it wanted to form some special form, but it did not have enough strength. As for her body, it was continuously healing and recovering under the effects of this energy. Chapter 121. Moonfrost Secret Art 2. Luo Fan's eyes flickered with 2 rays of golden light. He was using the ability to see through the source. In the blink of an eye, he could clearly see the transformation process of the energy in Guang Pu's body. At the same time, there were countless forms of energy evolving in his mind. He was trying hard to deduce what form the energy in Guang Pu's body would take when it finally condensed in a magical power from the energy transformation process that he saw. However, the energy in Guang Pu's body had only just begun to condense and transform. The strands of energy threads were filled with a mysterious colorless energy, causing the mysterious energy to seem to become gelatinous. It was impossible to see its specific form. Perhaps even Guang Pu herself did not know what form a magical power unit that she would eventually condense in a magical power would take. However, this seemingly unsolvable problem was only a small problem to Luo Fan. It was not even a difficult problem. In his mind, he simulated the transformation form of those energy threads. From the countless complicated and messy changes, he gradually drew out the 3-dimensional talisman that Guang Pu was unable to successfully transform into. With his experience with Hong Jun, it was easy to do this. Looking at the 3-dimensional talisman that was constructed, Luo Fan could not help but have a look of realization and surprise in his eyes. I didn't expect that Guang Pu's magical power unit would actually be in such a form. Could it be that it's the will of the heavens? Luo Fan sighed softly. After a while, he finally realized that no matter how hard he tried, the energy in his body could only maintain its gelatinous state and was unable to undergo a true qualitative change. Guang Pu moaned softly and slowly opened her eyes that had been closed for a long time. The black and white parts of her eyes were distinct, like the bright silver moon in the sky, exuding an inexplicable charm that made the ruined valley seem as enchanting as a fairyland on earth. Luo Fu was stunned by an invisible force in the distance, but his eyes were fixed on this side. At this moment, he saw the beauty of Guang Pu opening her eyes, and he could not help but be stunned. His mouth opened, and saliva slowly flowed out from the corner of his mouth. It was just as Luo Fan had guessed. Between Guang Pu and Luo Fu, through the magnificent and legendary experience of more than 50 years, a strange feeling had gradually developed. Although they were still very ignorant and did not know the matters between men and women, they unknowingly valued each other more than anyone else. This was not strange. The perception of time was relative. Compared to the tens of thousands of years of muddle-headedness, these 50 years of legendary experience felt much longer to them. It was long enough for them to develop feelings for each other. Luo Fu's cultivation level was lower, so his self-control was naturally not as strong as Guang Pu's. Therefore, it was more obvious than Guang Pu's. Therefore, when he saw the beauty of Guang Pu, the feelings in his heart finally sublimated. Instantly, from the original ignorance, he became extremely clear. This woman in front of him, he must keep her by his side forever. With this thought, his originally dull expression instantly changed, and an incomparably determined light shot out from his eyes. An inexplicable understanding appeared in his heart. Since he wanted to keep her by his side, if he was too much weaker than her, he would not be able to do it. In an instant, the thing that Luo Fan had been trying to do for tens of thousands of years, but he could not do it, was accomplished. Following this realization, the speed at which the Dan was breaking became even faster. In the blink of an eye, it was like a spider web had covered the entire Dan. The blue flames that seeped out of the cracks on the Dan became even more vigorous. They even seeped out of the Dan and floated around, making the entire Dan look like it was wrapped in blue flames. Luo Fan was observing Guang Pu from afar. Suddenly, he felt the change on Luo Fu's side. He thought for a moment and understood what was going on. He couldn't help but smile bitterly to himself. Who would have thought that the flower would not bloom, but the willow would grow? So the opportunity of traveling is none other than Guang Pu. After smiling bitterly, he raised his hand and waved it gently. The power that deterred Luo Fu immediately disappeared, allowing Luo Fu to regain control of himself once again. Although Luo Fu found it difficult to understand the strange appearance and disappearance of the invisible power, he was currently completely focused on Guang Pu, so he did not pay much attention to anything else. With a thought, he controlled the arcane artifact to turn into a white streak of light. With a sweep, it rushed to Guang Pu's side at a speed that was several times faster than before. Without holding back, he directly opened his arms and hugged Guang Pu. He said happily, "Junior sister, you finally succeeded. You scared me to death earlier." Senior brother, Guang Pu blinked. She did not care at all that she was completely naked in Luo Fu's embrace. She called out softly with a pleasant voice. There seemed to be a hint of joy on her face. Luo Fan did not plan to show himself, nor was he in the mood to watch the two of them flirt. He took a step and returned to the depths of the cave where the primal chi source was. He stood in the depths of the cave for a long time. His eyes flickered with the light of contemplation. Among them, there were countless complicated and profound words and diagrams that constantly flashed through his mind. After a long time, a confident smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. He raised his hand and pointed gently. A speck of light rushed out of his hand. After appearing in the outside world, the speck of light instantly exploded and turned into tens of thousands of complicated words and diagrams. They rushed towards the stone wall at the end of the cave and were completely imprinted into the stone wall. As the words and diagrams formed by the light imprinted into the stone wall suddenly underwent some mysterious changes. Tens of thousands of words and diagrams suddenly appeared on the stone wall, as if they were naturally born from the stone wall. At the very beginning of the tens of thousands of words and diagrams, there were 5 big words: Guanghan Bright Moon Technique. This technique was extremely profound. There were a total of 9 levels, corresponding to the 9 heavenly tribulations that transformed one's strength. Every time one experienced a heavenly tribulation, they would increase by 1 realm. When the 9 levels were perfected, it would be the time to obtain the Earth Immortal Tao fruit. Previously, when he was observing the changes in the energy in Guangpu's body, Luo Fan had already deduced that the final form of her Dharma power units would be bright moons, corresponding to the moon in the sky, which was also the moon that appeared every day. Suddenly, Luo Fan had a sudden impulse again. He pinched his fingers and deduced. He already understood what was going on. Guangpu actually has a great opportunity on the moon. It's not time yet. I should give her some pointers when the time comes. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. At this time, he suddenly remembered that ever since he came to the untainted land, he had never been to the sun and moon that were so obvious and so magical. Of course, this was influenced by the viewpoint he brought from the future Earth. That viewpoint made him subconsciously think that the sun was just a fireball and the moon was just a cold and desolate satellite. However, he couldn't help but forget that this was the untainted land, and the sun and moon here could not be compared to the future Earth. Maybe I should also go to the sun. Luo Fan thought to himself. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat, and he smiled inexplicably. He raised his hand and pointed. A bit of spiritual light rushed out of his hand and turned into tens of thousands of complicated words and diagrams, imprinting on the wall in the deepest part of the cave in front of him. Just like the Guanghan Bright Moon technique, it looked like it was naturally formed. After carefully examining this mental cultivation method, Luo Fan smiled slightly. With a thought, the purple-yellow light transformed by the Void Wuji Palace rushed forward with him, turning into an escape light hidden in the void, and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. On the 3rd day after Luo Fan left, Luo Fu and Guang Pu entered the cave hand in hand. After passing through the Tai In extreme, cold sky, evil thunder tribulation, Guang Pu's cultivation realm and strength had improved substantially. These improvements gave her the absolute confidence to deal with the innate god, who only had strength, but no Taoist cultivation. Therefore, after spending 3 days to consolidate her cultivation realm, she brought Luo Fu to the cave, planning to settle old scores with the innate god, and at the same time, test the improvement of her strength after passing through the tribulation. Stepping into the cave, Guangpu and Luo Fu looked at each other, and there was an inexplicable surprise in their eyes. Naturally, they had been to this cave before. At that time, the entire cave was filled with a warning malice, and it filled every corner of the cave. They also had a feeling that they were being watched in the dark, and in the depths of the cave, there was an indescribably powerful force that was constantly surging. But now all kinds of feelings had completely disappeared. The cave seemed to have become an ordinary cave, and even the vague, chaotic vitality in the cave seemed to be only a little thicker than other places. What's going on? Did that monster leave already? Luo Fu furrowed his brows as he carefully walked forward. At this time, Guangpu was naturally not naked like when she was going through the tribulation. Instead, she was wearing a white chiffon, which highlighted her amazing charm. Her beauty was so beautiful that it made people's hearts beat. Maybe I didn't feel any aura. Guangpu frowned and said softly. Never mind. We'll know once we go in and take a look. Luo Fu clapped his hands and said. As he spoke, he pulled Guangpu with one hand and slowly walked into the depths of the cave. The white tiger that was formed from the magic tool followed closely behind the two of them, looking around vigilantly. It seemed to be quite intelligent, and it was not far from becoming a magic tool. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the depths of the cave, and they saw the source of chaotic vitality that was constantly emitting chaotic vitality. Even when this source of chaotic vitality was at its largest, the amount of chaotic vitality that it emitted was far less than the top of Buzhou Mountain. Now that it had shrunk by 1,000 times, it was of course even more insignificant to the two of them. Therefore, they were not moved at all, and they did not pay any attention to this source of chaotic vitality. So Master had already predicted that I would achieve a breakthrough here. Suddenly, Guangpu exclaimed, her voice filled with indescribable worship and admiration. Luo Fu was shocked, and he hurriedly looked in the direction that Guang Pu was looking at. As expected, the moon technique seems to be of the same origin as the lunar divine wood technique. Dad really came here. However, what kind of technique is this? Yin-yang harmony technique? It can only be practiced by two people, and it's very beneficial to both parties. It seems very interesting. Although Luo Fu's cultivation was low, Luo Fan had given him countless pointers, so he naturally had a lot of knowledge. Therefore, he only needed a glance to clearly see where these two techniques came from. Chapter 122. The true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun. Obviously, the yin-yang harmony method was a very exquisite and mysterious dual cultivation method. The reason why he left behind such a cultivation technique was because Luo Fan's mischievous heart suddenly flared up. He wanted to see if the relationship between Luo Fu and Guang Pu would improve because of this dual cultivation technique. Of course, just like how people only care about the process and not the result, Luo Fan did not care much about the final result of this small calculation. Whether the relationship between Luo Fu and Guang Pu would improve because of this dual cultivation method or not, to him, the result was the same. If it succeeded, he would be happy. If it failed, he could be indifferent. Therefore, he did not bother to wait for the result and left. Riding the purple-yellow light transformed by the Wuji Palace, he flew away. The direction he chose was not anywhere else but up. When he was thousands of miles away from his body, he still felt a little worried. With a slight movement of his mind, the square seal in his sea of consciousness left his body and hid in the void. It sank down and came to the side of Luo Fu and Guang Pu. Just like before, it protected the two of them. As for himself, he continued to rush up into the sky. Currently, no one in the untainted world could restrict Luo Fan. And this time, Luo Fan came out to travel the untainted world in order to increase his knowledge so that his cultivation could be improved. However, he did not have a definite direction, nor did he have a definite place to go. Therefore, since he suddenly wanted to see the sun of the untainted world, he naturally would not wait until after his travel. The sun and moon of the untainted world existed in the endless starry sky. The sun rose and the moon set. The sun set and the moon rose. The cycle repeated, never stopping. Enveloped by the purplish-yellow light of the limitless void palace, Luo Fan's flying speed was extremely fast. In a short while, he had already crossed 90,000 miles of the void and arrived below the astral wind, lightning, and fire layer. Without any hesitation, he controlled the Wuji Palace and charged straight in. Compared to the last time, when he entered the astral wind, lightning, and fire layer, before he could even transform, Luo Fan's current cultivation realm and power had already undergone an earth-shaking change. In the past, the astral wind, thunder, and fire that could refine his physical body and increase his physical strength by several times or even dozens of times could not even detect his existence. When Luo Fan entered, there was no reaction at all. This allowed him to easily pass through the 9 layers of astral wind, lightning, and fire without being attacked or obstructed at all, arriving under the mysterious and indescribable endless starry sky. Hovering in the 9th layer of the astral wind, thunder, and fire layer, Luo Fan, who was living in harmony with those strange creatures condensed from different types of astral wind, thunder, and fire layer, raised his head and looked at the endless, mysterious starry sky above him. Streams of abstruse mnemonic incantations slowly flowed through his mind, while he was calculating the position of the sun. Looking up from the primordial world, the sun was quietly floating in the center of the sky, emitting endless light and heat. However, Luo Fan knew that it was just an illusion brought about by the mysterious characteristics of the endless starry sky. In fact, the sun had always been hidden in the depths of the endless starry sky. However, under the effect of the endless starry sky, it circulated with the moon in a mysterious and unimaginable way. This caused the primordial world to have the phenomenon of day and night alternating. This caused the sun to seem to be floating high in the center of the sky, as if it was within reach. The mystery contained within was unfathomable and unimaginable. Even Luo Fan could not understand it. As the mnemonic incantations flowed through his mind, Luo Fan's right hand moved continuously. At the same time, bits of wisdom and spiritual light continuously appeared in his mind. After a long while, a faint smile finally appeared on Luo Fan's face. He had already deduced the position of the sun with the ability of the yin-yang measurement method. For inanimate objects, the yin-yang measurement method was almost always successful. Naturally, he would not encounter any obstacles. With a slight change in his mind, the Void Wuji Palace rushed up with his body. It was as if they had entered another world, another universe, and rushed into the endless starry sky. He lowered his head and glanced around. The primordial world seemed to be extremely far below. Looking around, the void that contained the endless star essence was pitch black. It was deep and unfathomable, as if it contained endless mysteries. In this deep and unfathomable void, there were countless densely packed stars that covered the entire starry sky. They sparkled like countless eyes, appearing incomparably mysterious and magnificent. Obviously, it was not an easy task to find the seemingly ordinary sun and moon in this endless sea of stars. If not for the fact that he had already calculated the result, Luo Fan would definitely be at a loss, not knowing where to go. However, since the result had been deduced, the result was naturally very different. After slightly identifying the direction, Luo Fan drove the limitless void palace and drew a straight line toward the depths of the endless starry sky. It was 100 times easier than teleporting in the untainted land, and the distance was also 100 times farther. After a while, he finally came to the depths of the endless starry sky. In front of him, there was a huge fireball that looked the same as other stars from afar, but looked countless times bigger than other stars from here. That was the sun of the primordial world. Even though Luo Fan thought that he was experienced and knowledgeable, when he saw the sun at a close distance, he still felt that his mind were extremely shocked. With a slight thought, his body floated millions of miles away from the sun. Here, he could already feel the heat emitting from the bottom of his heart. He could feel that his whole body and his whole divine soul were being roasted by the endless heat from the inside out. The sun was indeed a huge fireball. However, the fireball was not filled with ordinary fire. It was filled with endless power and mysteries. It was the true fire of the sun, the nemesis of all evil things in the world. Even a thumb-sized ball of this true fire of the sun was enough to dry up a lake that was tens of thousands of feet wide and hundreds of feet deep. If he could collect this true fire of the sun and use it as a refining flame, although it was not as mysterious as the Tao fire, it could make the materials that had been refined with pure yang qi. Thus, the power of the refined magic tools would be greatly increased, and the possibility of them having spirituality would be greatly increased. Floating millions of miles away, Luo Fan felt the endless true fire of the sun and the huge amount of essence of the grand sun between the true fire of the sun. He could not help but feel that it was a pity that he had neglected the sun in the past. If he had known that the true fire of the sun was so powerful, the magic tools and magic treasures that he had refined in the past could have been at least a lot shorter in terms of refining time and effort. Even their power might have been increased by at least one level. With a slight thought, he controlled the purplish-yellow light that the Wuji Palace had turned into to fly away. Soon, it carried his body across millions of miles and landed directly on the surface of the sun. The closer he got to the sun, the higher the surrounding temperature became. The true fire of the sun and the essence of the grand sun became denser. From the moment he was burned by the true fire of the sun to the moment he landed on the surface of the sun, Luo Fan had flown thousands of miles away. Of course, with the protection of the Wuji Palace, Luo Fan did not feel anything wrong with the burning of the true fire of the sun. If he only felt it, he might not even feel the change of temperature. When he came into contact with the fire on the surface of the sun, Luo Fan raised his hand and gestured. The Wuji Palace, which had turned into a purplish-yellow light, guided the endless true fire of the sun and the essence of the grand sun into it. The spirit space inside the Wuji palace kept devouring them. Gradually, a small ball made of the true fire of the sun and the essence of the grand sun condensed outside the spirit space. At first, this small ball was only the size of a fist. However, as the true fire of the sun and the essence of the grand sun poured into it, it kept growing and condensing. When Luo Fan's figure landed on the surface of the sun and touched the surface of the star that was formed by the condensation of the sun's true fire and the sun's essence, the diameter of the small sphere had already grown to dozens of miles. Inside it, there was even a sphere with a diameter of 100 feet condensed into a solid sphere due to the excessive amount of true fire and essence. It had become a small sun. Secretly calculating in his heart, Luo Fan knew that this small sun was already enough for a minor kiliocosm. If it grew any larger, although this minor kiliocosm was vast, it would still be unable to withstand the burning of the sun's true fire and collapse. With a thought, the limitless void palace stopped absorbing the true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun. Instead, it slowly absorbed the true fire and the essence of the sun, ceaselessly replenishing the power of the small sun that had been lost due to illuminating the world. This method cannot generate the true fire of the sun and the essence of the grand sun, but has a great drawback. I need to rearrange it. Luo Fan thought carefully. Although the small sun in the spirit space could emit endless light and heat, it was only the condensation of the true fire of the sun and the essence of the grand sun. All the energy was external, and it could not generate itself. To maintain the existence of this small sun, it needed to constantly absorb the true fire of the sun and the essence of the grand sun. However, this was clearly not in accordance with the nature of the self-sufficiency of the spirit space. It would be fine for a short period of time, but in the long run, countless unimaginable problems would arise. However, he was now on the surface of the sun, where the true fire of the sun and the essence of the grand sun were inexhaustible. Therefore, Ji didn't need to solve this problem in a hurry. At the moment, what Luo Fan cared more about was what kind of more mysterious secrets were hiding on this sun. After all, according to the legend, this sun was transformed from Pangu's left eye. If one ignored the inexhaustible true fire of the sun, this sun would look like an ordinary planet. The ground was uneven, the mountains were deep, the valleys were deep, the rivers were green, the plants were green, insects, fishes, birds, beasts, everything that a normal planet should have could be found on this sun. However, all kinds of creatures on this planet were made from the essence sun fire and the essence of the grand sun. Except for the fact that these creatures were more intelligent, they weren't much different from the tens of thousands of miles thick true fire and essence on the surface of the planet. Luo Fan raised his hand and clenched his fingers. Not far away from him, a fire dragon, which had been vigilantly staring at him, let out a thunderous roar and was dragged before Luo Fan's face. With a slight movement of his spirit power, two golden beams of light dazzled straight out of his eyes, covering this tens of thousands of meters long fire dragon. Instantly, he saw through the origin of this fire dragon and the secret of how this fire dragon was formed. The core of this fire dragon was a dragon-shaped, three-dimensional talisman. Chapter 123. A spiritual talisman. I can't believe there's such a talisman that can contain its own spiritual consciousness. It seems to be similar to the artificial intelligence in science fiction. Luo Fan sighed inwardly. With a slight squeeze of his right hand, the violently struggling three-dimensional talisman instantly broke free from the fire dragon's core. It broke free of the endless true sun fire and great sun essence and appeared in his palm. As the dragon-shaped talisman broke free, the fire dragon's enormous body instantly collapsed, turning into endless true sun fire and great sun essence that scattered in all directions. It was like fireworks. The dragon-shaped talisman was the size of a thumb, and its structure was extremely complicated and profound. It continuously twisted in Luo Fan's hand. Strange waves spread out from within it, surging through the surrounding space. They transformed into extremely strange, yet majestic dragon roars. However, Luo Fan's strength was astonishing. Even if the talisman had a body and possessed endless strength, it could not resist his control. Moreover, the fire dragon's body had already dissipated, and its strength had weakened to an undetectable level. He stared at the three-dimensional talisman. Strands of energy lines constantly shifted and flickered, twisting and changing, causing the dragon-shaped talisman that was outlined to be lifelike. It was like a shrunken fire dragon, looking extremely mysterious and mystical. Fine, as the first living being I've brought to the sun, you and I could be considered to be fated. I'll take you in and let you see a wider world in the future, Luo Fan said indifferently. His words were transmitted into the dragon-shaped talisman, but there was no effect. It was obvious that the fire dragon's spiritual consciousness did not agree with his words. Luo Fan naturally did not care whether the fire dragon agreed or not. He raised his hand and gently clapped. The endless true sun fire in the surroundings gathered towards his palm. However, this time, it no longer condensed into a fire dragon's body. Instead, it formed a spherical three-dimensional talisman that suddenly wrapped around the dragon-shaped talisman. Then, it suddenly froze, causing the interior of the spherical three-dimensional talisman to be filled with an extremely mysterious power. The dragon-shaped talisman instantly froze inside, unable to move at all. Even the draconic roars coming from it instantly disappeared. Impressively, this was a seal that Luo Fan had created with the help of the true fire of the sun in the surroundings, sealing this dragon-shaped three-dimensional talisman. Using the spear of a child to attack the shield of a child, this method was quite interesting. With a wave of his left hand, the seal entered his sleeve universe without any resistance. This talisman has endless benefits for the Hercules summoning chant. If it is integrated into it, I might be able to create a higher-level sky dragon summoning chant. Perhaps I can study this talisman and see if it can help me cultivate my Dao fruit. Luo Fan thought to himself. He took a step forward, and with his own strength, he arrived at the top of a 30,000-meter-tall mountain in just a few steps. The pressure on the surface of the sun was extremely huge. If one wanted to move on the surface of the sun, they would need to expend several times more energy than the primordial world. Standing at the top of this towering mountain, Luo Fan looked around, and only a fiery red world filled with endless vitality entered his eyes. With a slight movement of his mind, a profound and complicated mantra flowed through his mind and consciousness. Following this mantra, two beams of golden light shot out of his eyes. Like searchlights, they swept across all the space that he could see. In an instant, the world formed by the flames underwent a huge change in his eyes. The origins of the countless living beings were illuminated by him. In the blink of an eye, he saw the essence of this world clearly. It's actually in this form, so the world, and living beings can be constructed in this form. Following that, various comprehensions emerged in Luo Fan's mind. This world on the surface of the sun was filled with all kinds of mysterious three-dimensional talismans. The flowers, plants, fish, birds, and beasts, and even some of the more mysterious mountain terrains were formed by the three-dimensional talismans, absorbing the endless true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun. It was these various three-dimensional talismans that formed this world full of vitality. Countless strange, spiritual consciousnesses of every description were produced, and countless living beings were formed. Among these endless living beings, the more powerful the living being, the larger the proportion of the three-dimensional talismans in its body. It had nothing to do with size. For example, the small fiery grass under Luo Fan's feet was almost entirely a three-dimensional talisman, with only a thin, almost gauze-like layer of the true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun covering it, forming its body. As for the tens of elephants drinking by the river formed by the true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun at the foot of the mountain, Nearly 90% of their bodies were those enormous three-dimensional talismans. Only 10% of their bodies were formed by the true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun. Lions, tigers, violent dragons, and so on. The more powerful a living being was, the smaller the proportion of the three-dimensional talismans in its body. Judging from this, the three-dimensional talisman in the core of the fiery dragon Luo Fan, caught earlier, only took up less than 1/10,000th of its entire body. It was definitely one of the most powerful living beings in the ecosystem on the sun. It was definitely at the top of the food chain on the surface of the sun. After carefully analyzing, Luo Fan cast a spell. These three-dimensional talismans were completely different from the countless three-dimensional talismans he created with the power of Pangu's soul. What Luo Fan paid attention to was the power and all kinds of mysterious functions. On the other hand, these three-dimensional talismans paid attention to the spiritual senses, all kinds of spiritual senses, which had their own characteristics, but were completely different. The focus was different, and the structure was also different, but both were equally mysterious. Both were full of mysteries. As he continued to compare these three-dimensional talismans with the ones he had created, bits of inspiration kept flashing in his mind. Gradually, Luo Fan found that he had a deeper understanding of the nature of the three-dimensional talismans. The mystery of the three-dimensional talismans seemed to be lifted up by a thin veil in front of him. With these insights, hundreds of new but equally mysterious three-dimensional talismans flowed through his mind in a short while. They were supplemented by him into the already complicated and mysterious three-dimensional talisman system. Go! Jihao gave a light shout. Luo Fan raised his hand and clapped. A mysterious, ever-changing, three-dimensional talisman dashed out of his palm. It spun in an instant, absorbing the endless true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun in the surroundings. In the blink of an eye, it condensed into a shape that could never exist on the surface of the sun. A person, a small, baby-like human figure, or rather, a born Taoist aptitude, the size of a baby. Inside this born Taoist aptitude, the three-dimensional talisman occupied half of its body. In the other half, the essence of the sun occupied another 80%, and the remaining 20% was the true fire of the sun. The whole shape was like a real body of flesh and blood. It floated in the air, waving its hands and giggling adorably. Judging from its shape and appearance, it seemed to have no spiritual senses, not much different from a real baby. It's still not mature enough. What a pity. Luo Fan did not feel happy because of this. Instead, he sighed and waved his hand. The baby rushed into the mountain under his feet and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. The baby looked very complete, like a real natural-born baby. But in fact, as Luo Fan said, it was still not mature enough. It was because of that, although the baby had wisdom, thoughts, and emotions, it did not have self-awareness. Even its wisdom, thoughts, and emotions were muddled. It was not even comparable to a treasure spirit like Zhifeng Boy. Therefore, Luo Fan, who wanted to create a living creature with the help of this mysterious three-dimensional talisman, was greatly disappointed. However, this soul sense was created by him after all, and it was in the form of a baby, so he couldn't bear to destroy it. He could only do his best to throw the baby into the core of the mountain, letting it absorb the endless true fire of the sun and the essence of the great sun. He hoped that this soul sense would continue to grow, and eventually, after a long time, it would be completely formed. Of course, this was only a hope. He also knew that the possibility was very slim. As expected, the mystery of the birth of heaven and earth is not so easy to fully grasp. After the disappointment, Luo Fan did not take it to heart. Instead, a lot of fighting spirit was born in his heart. If he could see through the mystery at a glance and create something to achieve the effect of surpassing the master, it could only mean that his original cultivation realm was higher than the level of mystery contained in the three-dimensional talisman. If that was the case, wanting to understand new principles from the three-dimensional talisman and make progress from it would naturally become an extravagant hope. At this moment, Being able to find the mystery that he could not see through at a glance was what he was looking forward to. However, he was not in a hurry. After all, he had plenty of time. Therefore, Luo Fan smiled and separated his attention from the three-dimensional talisman. This sun was extremely huge. Although Luo Fan knew that he was standing on a sphere, no matter how far he looked, he only felt that the world was flat. But no matter how far he looked, he only felt that the world was flat, and he couldn't feel much of an arc. With a thought, the limitless void palace wrapped around his body and teleported. Fortunately, although it was difficult to move around on this sun with his own strength, it was very easy to move with the help of magic treasures. Therefore, Luo Fan did not feel that it was too troublesome. In the blink of an eye, after dozens of moves, Luo Fan had already arrived next to an underground cave. This underground cave was so deep that it could not be seen the bottom. It led straight to the depths of the sun. The real fire of the sun and the essence of the great sun that seeped through it was extremely dense. It was almost denser than the real fire and essence that had condensed into a solid state. With a glance, Luo Fan made a hand sign. There was actually a three-dimensional talisman surrounding the cave. It was this three-dimensional talisman that allowed the cave to have such power. It turned the real fire and purification, which should have been in a solid state, into a gaseous state and continuously dissipated. This gaseous real fire of the sun and the essence of the great sun caused the temperature around the cave to be at least 100 times higher than other places. This caused the surrounding thousands of miles to have no living beings. It was extremely desolate. Legend has it that there is an innate god on this sun. I wonder if it has been born yet. Luo Fan thought. Chapter 124. Panga's heart of Tao collapsed. As soon as he entered the cave, Luo Fan felt as if his body was wrapped by some strange power. It was as if moving his body was 10 times more difficult than usual. Luo Fan slightly wrinkled his brows. Although the feeling of being wrapped in power and having difficulty in moving was not a big problem for him, it was, after all, an abnormal state, and a very strange abnormal state at that. This strange state, even if it happened in a normal time, was also something worth paying attention to. What's more, he was under the heavy protection of the Wuji Palace. This strange state could actually affect him at this time, as if the Wuji Palace did not exist. It was really quite strange, and he could not ignore it. Suddenly, his mind moved, and the Earth Immortal's Tao fruit in his lower dantian shook slightly, and suddenly collapsed. It turned into a magical power and began to flow slowly in his meridians. As the magical power flowed, Luo Fan instantly felt his body relax. The strange feeling of being wrapped up by a strange power disappeared in an instant. It was as sudden and untraceable as its appearance. This layer of ring-shaped three-dimensional talisman actually has such a function. Luo Fan thought to himself, with his cultivation level. Although he could not clearly sense the specific details of the appearance and disappearance of the strange power, through analysis, he could easily find the source of this strange power. The source could not be anything else other than the layer of circular, three-dimensional talisman around the hundreds of feet diameter cave. What is hidden in this cave? Does it really lead to the center of the sun? Is there an innate god in the center? Realizing the strange function of the three-dimensional talisman, Luo Fan could not help but be more interested in these questions. His choice to enter this cave was naturally not the result of a random choice. In fact, according to his calculation, near the place where he landed, there was only this cave that was very likely to lead to the center of the sun. If an innate god was born in the sun, it would most likely appear in the center of the sun. With a thought, Luo Fan slightly slowed down his sinking speed. A mysterious mnemonic formula flowed through his mind. In a blink of an eye, 2 beams of dazzling golden light shot out from his eyes, covering the ring-shaped three-dimensional talisman around the cave like searchlights. Countless mysterious information entered his mind through this golden light. In the blink of an eye, he saw through the origin of this three-dimensional talisman. These are actually only a part of the talisman. After seeing through the origin of this three-dimensional talisman, Luo Fan couldn't help but be greatly shocked in his heart. The entire crypt, from the entrance to the end of the unknown distance, was actually just a part of the talisman. Then, how big would the complete talisman be, and how mysterious would it be? Luo Fan couldn't help but be shocked. As he constantly memorized the surrounding talisman in his mind, Luo Fan's body also gradually sank. As his body continued to sink, his understanding of this three-dimensional talisman became more and more profound. He was also more and more shocked in his heart. The true fire of the sun and the essence of the grand sun around the cave increased as he went deeper. Where he had sunk for 1,080,000 miles, the true fire of the sun and the essence of the grand sun around the cave had already condensed into a dazzling white light, emitting an existence that was enough to distort the space. The endless heat emitted from it had even exceeded the limit that the Wuji Palace could withstand. Moreover, Luo Fan also felt that his body was being burned more and more. Fortunately, when he transformed, he had transformed into the most authentic born Taoism body, so his body's ability to withstand heat had reached an unimaginable level. Therefore, although the temperature that his body felt was still more than 1,000 degrees after being isolated by the Wuji Palace, he still didn't show any signs of being unable to withstand it. He just felt a little uncomfortable. "I've finally reached the end." Feeling that uncomfortable feeling, suddenly a very strange feeling came from a few miles in front of Luo Fan, and the circular three-dimensional talisman also had some kind of subtle and mysterious change. In an instant, Luo Fan understood. As expected, after a while, after he had crossed a few miles, he suddenly felt that there was nothing in front of him, and his surroundings became extremely open. At the same time, the temperature that his body felt suddenly increased by more than 1,000 degrees. He had already entered an extremely strange world. This strange world was a space that existed in the form of a spherical shape. Its diameter was more than 49,000 miles, and it was extremely huge and wide. On the walls of this spherical space, there were 129,600 caves that were exactly the same as the one that Luo Fan had just passed through. These caves were distributed on the walls in a way that contained infinite mysteries, forming a mysterious array that contained some kind of wonderful law. However, these were not what shocked Luo Fan the most. What shocked him the most was that this spherical space with a diameter of 49,000 miles was actually a huge circular three-dimensional talisman. Those ring-shaped three-dimensional talismans in the 129,600 crypts were actually part of this three-dimensional talisman. In this space, the three-dimensional talisman was composed of energy threads that were as thin as ropes, but as tough as diamonds. They were condensed from the essence of the sun's true fire and the sun, relative to the scale of the entire three-dimensional talisman. These were energy threads. These threads were so small compared to the total size, but they were so densely distributed. They covered every position of the spherical space with a diameter of 49,000 miles. One could imagine the number and density of them. Floating at the entrance of the cave, Luo Fan suddenly felt that the three-dimensional talisman in front of him was so familiar. However, he was extremely clear that he had never seen this three-dimensional talisman before. This was definitely the first time that he had seen this three-dimensional talisman. This kind of strange contradiction made him fall into deep thought. The golden light emitted from his eyes, which could see through the array and illuminate the origin of this three-dimensional talisman, constantly swept across this spherical space. At the same time, he almost instinctively calculated the origin of this three-dimensional talisman. "I see." Abruptly, Luo Fan's mind shook. He knew why he felt that this three-dimensional talisman was so familiar. Shockingly, this three-dimensional talisman outlined an enormous pupil, a giant pupil, with a diameter of 49,000 miles, composed of the endless essence fire of the sun and the essence of the sun. Considering all the three-dimensional talisman in the surrounding caves together, Luo Fan instantly figured out what this sun was. The legend is true. This sun is indeed transformed from Pangu's left eye. The shock in Luo Fan's heart was indescribable. Before, he already knew that Pangu's power was unimaginably great. After all, even the chaos was created by Pangu. However, ever since he created a small kiliacosm and created all living beings in it, he had a faint sense of confidence. That confidence made him feel that, although there was a huge difference between him and Pangu right now, one day he would definitely surpass Pangu. However, in the face of the sun before him, his confidence was instantly shattered. Luo Fan was like an ant in the midst of the endless true sun fire and great sun essence. If it wasn't for the protection of the limitless Void Palace, he wouldn't have been able to withstand the heat emitted by the true sun fire and great sun essence. He even felt that if the three-dimensional talisman in front of him slightly vibrated, he would be turned into ashes instantly. And this was only one of Pangu's left eyes. It didn't contain Pangu's will. It was just a dead left eye. Even if I practiced that cultivation method to the peak, even if I obtained the primordial chaos Tao fruit, can I compare with this left eye of Pangu? Luo Fan couldn't help but think. At this moment, the drawbacks that Luo Fan had formed after coming to the chaos finally broke out. Facing this invincible existence in front of him, his seemingly tenacious Taoist heart completely collapsed. As his Taoist heart collapsed, in his sea of consciousness, the towering divine soul that had turned into Buzhou Mountain also had countless cracks. These cracks were extremely small, but they were extremely dense. They were distributed over the entire divine soul, like an incomparably huge and dense silk net that wrapped the entire divine soul. With the great change of the divine soul, the entire sea of consciousness gradually began to shake faintly. At the edge of the sea of consciousness, the space shattered, and countless strange fragments were devoured by the surrounding gray existence. At the same time, the Dharma powers in his body scattered everywhere, causing his connate Tao body, which was originally tough and unbreakable, to be able to withstand thousands of degrees of heat without any damage, to the point that blood spewed everywhere, and his meridians were shattered. So, I've always been a frog at the bottom of a well. So I've always been arrogant. I'm like an ant that's about to trip an elephant. Luo Fan had already fallen into self-doubt and self-denial. He did not care about the changes in his divine soul and the collapse of his sea of consciousness. He did not feel the turbulence of the Dharma powers and the damage to his body. Ever since Luo Fan came to the primordial world, his life had been too smooth. Just by visualizing Buzhou Mountain, he had triggered Pangu's primordial spirit and created the mysterious Tao fruit. Just by entering the astral wind, thunder, and fire layer, he triggered the astral wind, thunder, and fire to temper his body. Then, he triggered the transformation heavenly tribulation and directly became an earth immortal Tao fruit. After becoming an earth immortal Tao fruit, he directly caused Pangu's primordial spirit to dissipate, allowing him to comprehend endless mysterious techniques. Wait. All of this seemed to have been arranged, allowing him to advance quickly. The result was that Luo Fan's Taoist heart seemed tough and unbreakable, but in fact, its essence was even inferior to Hong Jun's. Therefore, when it was shocked by Pangu's power, it instantly collapsed. Chapter 125. Chaotic Memories and Countless Selves according to Luo Fan's Tao heart, which seemed firm but actually had a fatal flaw. Unless his cultivation realm suddenly improved at a certain moment, and he noticed the flaw, Luo Fan's Tao heart would collapse sooner or later. The only difference was where and when it would collapse. As for the sun, it constantly emitted endless light and heat. It illuminated the primordial world and provided endless vitality to all living beings. Its quality was extremely yang and firm, and it was the nemesis of all yin and evil spirits. If Luo Fan's Tao heart collapsed in the primordial world, then the moment his Tao heart collapsed, it would emit an extremely mysterious aura. This mysterious aura would directly penetrate the primordial world through some mysterious method and reach the outside of the primordial world. It would open a door that led to the primordial world from countless heavens beyond the primordial world, allowing the endless otherworldly demons that lived in the endless heavens beyond the heavens to surge into the primordial world through this door and attack him endlessly. This process was also commonly known as chi deviation. At that time, with Luo Fan's Tao heart collapsing, his dermic powers rioting, his soul damaged, and his sea of consciousness shattered, the outcome would be very obvious. He would definitely be doomed eternally, die, and his soul would dissipate. However, if the collapse of his Tao heart happened in the center of the sun, the outcome would be very different. Above the sun, the true sun fire and the essence of the sun could restrain all yin and evil spirits and cover up all the auras in it. It was enough to cover up the mysterious aura produced by Luo Fan's chi deviation. It was enough to prevent the door from opening so that the endless otherworldly demons could not find Luo Fan, who was like a huge cake. This gave Luo Fan enough time to gather his collapsed Tao heart and stabilize his chaotic power. At this moment, Luo Fan had completely fallen into self-doubt and self-denial. The condition of his body was deteriorating rapidly, and it seemed that he was doomed. However, there was a mysterious aura that came from nowhere, protecting the last bit of clarity in the depths of his heart. This mysterious aura did not come from Luo Fan's body, nor did it come from the Wuji boy that Luo Fan had refined to protect Luo Fan, nor did it come from the Jifeng boy in the primordial world. Instead, it came from the small Kiliacosm within the limitless void palace. This mysterious aura was very weak. Compared to Luo Fan's huge divine soul, it was almost negligible. But it was this mysterious aura that allowed Luo Fan to avoid eternal damnation. Impressively, this bit of power came from Luo Fan's soul, which had been constantly reincarnating in the spirit space. Through the mysterious connection, this bit of power was transmitted to the depth of Luo Fan's soul. It had been 3 years in the primordial world since Luo Fan put this bit of divine soul and the inextinguishable spiritual light into the spirit space to be reincarnated. In total, it had been more than 1,000 years in the spirit space. In the past 1,000 years, the combination of divine soul and spiritual light had been reincarnated in this spirit space for a total of 28 times. He reincarnated almost every 30 years. In the world where martial arts could prolong one's lifespan, he would die every 30 years. There is no need to mention all kinds of fights, conspiracies, and grudges that he had experienced. Originally, the collapse of Luo Fan's Taoist heart should have affected his entire divine soul, whether it was in his sea of consciousness or the divine soul that had been separated by him. However, this bit of divine soul was integrated with the inextinguishable spiritual light. Unknowingly, it was protected by the inextinguishable spiritual light. To the inextinguishable spiritual light that could never be destroyed, dissipated, and died, how could the collapse of Luo Fan's Tao heart be a big deal? As a result, the effects of the collapse of his Tao heart didn't cause any harm to his soul at all. On the contrary, his divine soul used this connection to stimulate the indestructible characteristics of the inextinguishable spiritual light and protect the trace of clarity in the depths of Luo Fan's heart. As long as it was alive, it would have an extremely strong instinct to survive. As a connate god who was born with great mystical abilities, Luo Fan's instinct to survive was even stronger. Therefore, when this bit of clarity appeared, Luo Fan instinctively guarded this bit of clarity. Although he was still in self-doubt and self-denial, he could already vaguely feel that the situation was different. However, he could only vaguely feel it. If he wanted to completely get rid of his self-doubt and self-denial and let his state return to normal, or even improve, he had to rebuild his Tao heart. Without the extraterrestrial demons to cause trouble, Luo Fan had enough time to do this. In the constant self-doubt and self-denial, all the memories from the time he was born on the earth in the future to the time he came to the primordial world more than 100 years ago slowly emerged in Luo Fan's mind. Every trace, every wisp, every bit, and every inch was dug out from the depths of his divine soul. As these memories flowed through, Luo Fan seemed to have experienced everything in his memory countless times. Every time, he was immersed in it, as if he had returned to the time point in his memory. However, in these experiences, Luo Fan made a completely different choice every time. These countless choices were intertwined. Through the entire process of Luo Fan's birth to the present, they eventually evolved into countless different personalities, producing thousands of completely different Luo Fan. In other words, thousands of completely different selves gradually appeared in Luo Fan. Among them, some are like the most benevolent saints, some are like the most evil demons, some were as crazy as lunatics, and some were as dull and numb as fools. Thousands of personalities and selves instantly filled Luo Fan's heart. This was his instinctive desire to reform his Tao heart after it had collapsed. This caused all of his emotions, all of his memories, and all of his selves to mix together. It developed in an incomparably chaotic manner, developing into millions of different selves and millions of different personalities. As time passed, these thousands of selves and personalities were gradually perfected and became clearer. They were gradually projected into Luo Fan's collapsing sea of consciousness. They were densely packed and almost filled every inch of the sea of consciousness. As long as I merge with this mountain, I will be able to break through the boundary between the real and the fake, and turn the fake into the real. This thought instinctively appeared in the hearts of these thousands of selves. These selves that were gradually taking shape were completely identical to Luo Fan's appearance. It was just that the expressions on their faces were different, and the auras they gave off were very different. Therefore, none of them looked similar to Luo Fan. As this thought appeared, these thousands of selves focused their gazes on the center of the sea of consciousness, where countless cracks were appearing and the Buzhou mountain was on the verge of collapse. That was naturally Luo Fan's spirit. In fact, as long as one of these thousands of selves rushed into the sea of consciousness and merged with his spirit, Luo Fan would be able to escape from the state of qi deviation and the collapse of his Tao heart. However, after that, Luo Fan was no longer himself. Instead, he had turned into a completely different person, an existence that was completely different from before. It was equivalent to Luo Fan's death at this moment. The instinct of life made each of these thousands of selves want to rush over and merge with his spirit. But in the end, only one of them could enter. As such, a battle was inevitable. In just an instant, Luo Fan's sea of consciousness was engulfed in flames, turning into a cruel Azura killing field. These selves had all developed from Luo Fan's memories. They could naturally choose the innumerable magic arts and remarkable abilities that Luo Fan knew at will. However, their personalities were different, so the magic arts and remarkable abilities that they chose to cultivate were naturally very different. Naturally, there was a difference in strength. These thousands of selves had developed from memories. They did not break through the boundary between the real and the fake, but they were existences that existed between the real and the fake. Therefore, their battle was naturally between the real and the fake. A battle in this state, even if it was billions of yuan, would only last for an instant compared to the outside world. Light and shadow flashed extremely quickly. After a while, only two selves with incomparably powerful auras were left in the entire sea of consciousness, standing opposite each other. Among them, one of them emitted an extremely dark and deep black light, and an extremely powerful killing aura gushed out from his body, occupying half of the sea of consciousness. The other self emitted a dazzling white light, and an aura that was not inferior to that of the other self was in a stalemate with the black light. Why do you always go against me? Let me control this body, and the entire untainted world will be ours. We will devour the untainted world and finally become another Pangu. At that time, I will be able to create another world and recreate you. Isn't that good? Why do you want to fight with me? Luo Fan, who was emitting the black light, said in a hoarse voice. I'm fighting with you to stop you from devouring the untainted world. Devouring the untainted world is to kill all living beings for myself. I don't agree with such a thing. As for recreating us, there is no need. You are me, and I am you. Luo Fan, who was emitting the white light, said lightly. Hypocrite, hypocrite, hypocrite. You clearly want to occupy this body. No matter how much you say, it won't change your nature. Hey Luo Fan, said in a hoarse voice. I have a clear conscience, White Luo Fan said. You? What do you want in order to give your body to me? We have been fighting for billions of yuan, and we are equal. Even after countless years, I am afraid it will still be the same. Now, our spirits, bodies, and supernatural power can no longer bear it. If we delay any longer, everything will be gone. Black Luo Fan said angrily. Even if I die, I will not let you control my body and devour the untainted world. White Luo Fan looked indifferent, and his expression did not change at all. These two cells were developed from Luo Fan's memory, and they were the two most powerful selves. One was the best, and the other was the worst. Although it seemed to be only a short while from the outside, billions of yuan had passed between reality and illusion.